Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. My dad, a hard-working man, always put his family first. He lived simply, but his kindness filled every corner of our home. He always did his best, striving to make things right, no matter the odds. Unfortunately, after being diagnosed with small cell lung cancer, he fought hard for nearly a year. We thought he had finally won. We went into his follow-up appointment full of hope, expecting the good news we had been waiting for. But instead, we were told the cancer had come back, stronger than ever, spreading to his brain, adrenal glands, and other parts of his body. That day was one of the hardest of my life. The doctors said brain radiation could help control the seizures and pain, but wouldn't cure him. Hospice care was recommended, and we were told to prepare for the inevitable. On April 29, 2012, my father passed away at home, surrounded by family. That summer, my wife and I decided to go camping in northern Arizona. My dad used to call it going up north, and it felt right to visit some of his favorite spots. I wanted to carry on that tradition to honor those childhood memories of camping trips with him. We had a peaceful weekend, but on our way out of the forest, we got a little lost. My wife started to panic, but I reassured her. "Don't worry," I told her. "Dad is guiding us. We'll be fine." She seemed to relax, and we kept driving. Before long, we rounded a bend and saw a sign that read Willow Springs. It was one of my dad's favorite spots, and I felt certain he had led us there. The spring was dry now, but I could still sense his presence. A few months after his passing, I had an incredibly vivid dream about him. In the dream, he walked through the front door of our old house. I was so relieved to see him again, and I immediately started asking him about the afterlife. His answers were brief, and the warmth I expected wasn't there. When I asked what it was like, he told me it was lonely, but that he had one friend there. He also said it was scary. At the end of the dream, he was sitting on the floor, wrapped in a blanket because he was cold. I hugged him tight, resting my head on his shoulder as I cried. I woke up in the middle of the night and wrote down everything I could remember. I've never forgotten the details. Soon after, we learned that the friend he mentioned in the dream had passed away. On his deathbed, the man told his wife that he wasn't afraid because my dad was there waiting to guide him. Moments later, he passed peacefully. It brought me some comfort to know my dad had been there for him, but parts of the dream still haunted me. I started researching dream interpretations and came across some things. Fear in a dream could signal a warning of difficult times ahead, and being wrapped in a blanket might symbolize something new on the way, like a baby. It wasn't long before we found out my wife was pregnant. It felt like a miracle, considering how long we had been trying without success. We were almost ready to give up, but there she was, a little one on the way. Our daughter was born on May 2, 2013, just days after the first anniversary of my dad's passing. I felt deep in my heart that my dad had been signaling her arrival. But what about the warning he had given me? That September, I was driving home from work when my truck suddenly became hard to control, veering left without me steering it that way. I didn't think much of it at first, but later that evening, I started feeling weak on my left side. I told my wife, and she insisted we go to the hospital. It turned out I had suffered a stroke on the right side of my brain. At 35 years old, I was overweight, had high blood pressure, was developing diabetes, and smoked heavily. The reality hit me hard. My dad had been warning me all along, and I hadn't listened. Now I was paying the price. Months went by as I worked to recover, relearning how to walk and adjusting to life again. I consider myself lucky. Lucky it wasn't worse, almost as if someone somewhere was watching over me. On the 4th of July that year, my family gathered at my mom's house for a barbecue. It was one of my dad's favorite holidays: fireworks, burgers, and being with his family. As we sat together, I suddenly smelled cigarette smoke. My dad had been a heavy smoker, but I hadn't lit up in nearly a year, and no one else in the house smoked. My wife smelled it too just for a second. We both believed it was my dad, stopping by to check on us. Later, we took a picture of my mom with my daughter and niece. In the reflection of the turned-off television, there appeared to be a figure standing nearby. Everyone who saw the photo agreed it looked like a man. I wanted so badly to believe it was my dad, watching over them, just like he always had. Not long ago, after a long day at work, I was in the shower, leaning against the wall, letting the water wash over me. I started thinking about my dad. In that moment, it felt like we were talking, like he was really there, listening. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Maybe it was just my mind, but it brought me a sense of peace. Maybe my dad isn't completely gone. Maybe he still checks in on us, guides us, and sends us signs to remind us that his love is still here. Whether it's a smell, a dream, or a sudden memory, I know he's still with us, watching over his family just like he always did. It all began when my mom and I moved into the old townhouse during my freshman year of high school. My parents had just divorced, and my mom decided it was time for a change. She bought a 2-story townhouse right across from Pine Lake High School. The complex wasn't new, but the townhouse had been vacant for a while, years actually. It had sat empty, the last available unit, and my mom was the first person to buy it. I always thought haunted houses were supposed to be ancient or centuries old, but I quickly learned I was wrong. For the next 7 years, that house would haunt me in ways I couldn't explain. It wasn't until my sophomore year that I started noticing strange things happening around the house. At night, I'd feel something tugging at my legs or feet as I tried to sleep, like invisible hands grabbing at me. It made me feel like I was losing my mind. One night, my friend Jenna stayed over. Her older boyfriend was having a party, and she wanted to sneak out. I had the bright idea of taking my mom's car without her knowing, so we could go to the party. I sneaked into my mom's room as quietly as possible and grabbed her purse for the car keys. As soon as I had them, I heard a woman's voice call my name. Jenna and I froze, staring at each other. We both heard it. I thought it was my mom waking up, but when I checked, she was still asleep downstairs, and my little brother was fast asleep upstairs. It gave us both chills, but we went out anyway. About a year later, I had the most vivid, terrifying dream. I dreamt of a demon sitting on my chest, choking me. I woke up gasping for air, my knees pulled up to my chest, arms stretched out, just like I had been in the dream. In the dream, there were a group of elderly people introducing themselves to me, each one telling me they were already dead. One of them warned me to keep an eye on my friend Jenna in the weeks to come. Just as I was starting to process the warning, the demon appeared out of nowhere and attacked me. The next day at school, I found out that Jenna's grandfather had passed away overnight. She was heartbroken, and I made sure to be there for her through it all. Another terrifying event happened the following year when my mom's friend, Kelly, had to stay with us temporarily because she was sick. She stayed downstairs in the guest room while I was sleeping in the loft, which overlooked the living room. One night, I had just turned off the light and laid down when I heard Kelly's voice whisper my name. "Hey Kayla, are you awake?" she asked softly. I answered, "No. What's up?" There was a pause, and then she said, "I was wondering something." And then silence. Confused, I looked over the railing of the loft, but no one was there. I quickly turned the light back on, but the room was empty. Panicked, I bolted downstairs to check on Kelly, but she was sound asleep. My mom was asleep too. I was terrified. I broke down in tears, unable to take it anymore. All the strange events, the creepy occurrences, it felt like I was being hunted by something dark. I woke my mom up, crying, and told her everything that had been happening. To my surprise, no one else in the house had ever noticed anything strange. But it didn't stop there. The activity only escalated. I'd feel hands pushing me, my hair would get tugged, and I constantly felt like someone was watching me. One day, I was standing in the kitchen, talking to my mom while I heated something up in the microwave, when I felt a force shove me forward. My mom saw it too. Her face went pale. She couldn't believe it. She begged me to let her call a priest to bless the house, but I refused. I was raised going to church every Sunday, and I felt embarrassed to explain this to anyone. By then, the voices had stopped, and I thought I could handle the rest on my own. The final terrifying moment came just before my mom sold the house. I was home alone, getting ready for work. I was blow-drying my hair when I suddenly felt a strong grip on my arm. The force yanked my arm holding the blow-dryer down to my side and held it there for several long seconds. I couldn't move. It felt like something powerful was holding me in place, but then, just as suddenly as it had grabbed me, it let go. Trembling, I ran downstairs and collapsed on the couch, shaking with fear. It took everything I had to go back upstairs and finish getting ready, but I wasn't going to let whatever it was scare me anymore. I had had enough. I was relieved when my mom finally sold the townhouse. Later, she told me that before we moved in, the unit had been vandalized. There had even been a fire, which is why it had been the last one available. I can't help but wonder if something dark had been left behind in that house, waiting for someone like me to walk in and torment. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural, but I try to keep an open mind. What I'm about to share has affected my younger sister and my father the most, and honestly, I'm still not sure what to make of it. I'll let you come to your own conclusions. My family moved to a small town in southern Arizona, just outside of Tombstone, when I was in middle school. Now I'm in college, so we've been here for about 7 years. 6 years ago, my parents bought a plot of land, and we built a house from the ground up. My mom was obsessive about the details, picking out every little thing, and we moved in 5 years ago. At first, everything was perfect. No issues, no strange occurrences. It was just a nice, quiet house and a quiet town. But about a year in, I started noticing something strange. My dad, who had always been a heavy sleeper, started having trouble with sleep. At first, I thought it was work stress or maybe just the adjustment to the new house, but it got worse. He began staying up late, almost as if he was avoiding sleep altogether. He started asking me to close the bathroom door and the closet door whenever I was in their room. It was little things at first, but it kept happening. Months went by, and I started to get concerned. One day, when my dad picked me up from school, I decided to ask him what was going on. What he told me that day shook me to my core. He said that in the middle of the night he started waking up to see 3 figures standing silently in the corners of the room. At first, I thought it was just sleep paralysis, but the way he described them left me wondering. The first figure was a tall man in an old-fashioned suit and hat, a 19th century type of get-up. He had pale skin, dark hair, and a beard. The second figure was a Native American woman, maybe in her 60s, with long braids and a solemn expression. The third, and the most disturbing, was a little boy in old-timey children's clothes. My dad said the boy liked the bathroom and tormented him the most. All 3 of them had hollow, dark eyes. My dad wasn't sure which one had what. The man and the woman mostly just stood there and watched him, but the boy was different. My dad said that if the bathroom door was left open, the boy would appear right next to his bed when he woke up. The kid scared him more than the others. So my dad made it a point to always close the bathroom door before going to bed. There was one night that really freaked him out. He woke up to what sounded like banging on the bathroom door, along with the sound of a child grunting, like the boy was trying to break through the door. The next day, we did a quick cleansing of the house with sage and incense. After that, the figures disappeared, and my dad could finally get some sleep again. Neither my mom nor I experienced anything, but my younger sister, Zelda, did. She was just 10 at the time and had just moved into her own room. She was so excited about having a space of her own. But after only a few nights, she came to me, asking if she could sleep in my room instead. I wasn't too surprised. She was still young, and I figured it was just the usual childhood fears. Our rooms are next to each other, separated by a shared wall where my bed is. After a while, I started getting this uneasy feeling whenever I went into her room. It wasn't the same as the figures my dad saw. It felt different, like something was always in there watching. something active. At night, we hear knocking sounds on the shared wall, even though no one was in her room. It was always the coldest and darkest room in the house, and I never felt comfortable staying in there for too long. Her lights would randomly flicker off, and her TV would turn off on its own. Sometimes her door would lock itself, and the closet door, which she always kept shut, would open a crack when no one had touched it. But the scariest thing happened about a year ago. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of Zelda screaming. I rushed to her room with my mom, and we found her hiding under the covers, trembling and crying, her ear bleeding. It was the most terrified I had ever seen her. After some coaxing, she finally told me what happened. She said she woke up around 3 a.m. and saw a tall, inhuman figure standing by her closet. It had long arms, unnaturally long, and no eyes, just darkness where its face should have been. She froze in terror, and the figure started moving closer with every blink, like something out of a nightmare. When it was right next to her, she couldn't breathe, as if something invisible was holding her down. Then she said the figure unhinged its jaw, stretching it to an impossible size, and screamed. The sound was so loud that it hurt her ears. That's when she started screaming, and we ran in. By the time we got there, the figure was gone. Since that night, Zelda refuses to sleep in her room. She's been staying in mine, but now that we're renovating her room, she's going to have to move back in soon. We've tried to make her feel safer by allowing her to burn incense, and even set up a small shrine to Buddha in the room. It's been quiet since then, but every time I go in there, I get a strange, uneasy feeling. It's hard to shake off. I'm not sure what's going on or why these things happened. Maybe there's something to it, but I just want closure for my family. If anyone has had a similar experience, I'd really appreciate any advice or insight. What do you think happened next? Have you ever experienced something like this? It was early fall in Pine Lake, a quiet town tucked away in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia. Known for its eerie old cemetery and the nearby abandoned mill, Pine Lake was steeped in ghost stories and local legends. At the time, I was 24 years old, stationed at a nearby military base for an intelligence course, working hard to advance in my career. To give you some context, I've always been a skeptic. Growing up, my mom often shared spooky stories about strange encounters, but my dad, a man of science, would scoff at the idea of ghosts. To this day, I laugh at shows like Ghost Hunters. To me, there's always a reasonable explanation for the unexplainable. Military assignments like mine are temporary, with a focus on training and development. For 6 weeks, I lived out of a duffel bag, staying in a rundown hotel near the base. The nature of military life means you quickly become friends with fellow soldiers, even if it's only for a short time. By the last week of the course, we decided to celebrate our survival with a dinner out. We chose the Hollow Inn, a local restaurant with a storied past. Over the years, it had been a tavern, a secret speakeasy, and according to some, the site of numerous shady dealings. The owner, a quiet man with a thick West Virginian accent, told us the legend of its most notorious guest, the ghost of a ruthless outlaw who had once terrorized the region. As the tale goes, the outlaw had a taste for strong liquor and even stronger women, and one night he crossed paths with a young sheriff looking to make a name for himself. The two clashed outside the inn, and in the ensuing gunfight, the outlaw was killed. Since that night, staff and patrons alike had reported hearing the sound of boots tapping down empty hallways, the smell of cigar smoke in a no-smoking area, and the sensation of being watched by something malevolent. The story caught our attention. Some of us shared our own odd experiences, while the more skeptical ones scoffed. But by the end of the meal, a couple of us were curious enough to venture into the back rooms where the spirit was said to haunt. The hallway was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, casting long shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Dusty old memorabilia lined the walls. An ancient wooden shotgun, a faded photograph of a couple long gone, and an old record player spinning nothing but static. It all felt like something out of an old Western movie. Eventually, it was just me and Daniel, a staff sergeant I'd become close to during the course. A couple of beers in, and I felt cocky, so I started joking about the ghost, daring it to show itself. Nothing happened. The bulb swayed gently, the radio crackled, and the hallway remained silent. I was about to call it a night when something shifted. The hotel we were staying at wasn't far from the inn. My room was on the first floor, with a window overlooking an empty alley between two dilapidated buildings. The only light came from a flickering street lamp, casting long shadows. The thick, faded curtains hung heavily over the window, their teal and orange colors worn with age. As I settled into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a strange pressure filled the room. I closed the curtains and tried to sleep, but a few hours later, I woke with a start. The clock on the nightstand read 12:15. A feeling of unease washed over me as I noticed the curtains were now partially open. A shaft of moonlight stretched across the room, and that's when I saw it. In the alley under the streetlight stood a dark, indistinct figure. It was barely more than a shadow, its edges blurry, like smoke drifting in the night air. It leaned against one of the buildings, watching the alley. Every instinct screamed that it was no friend. I couldn't look away, though my chest tightened with fear. Even without any clear features, I could feel its eyes, cold and hateful, fixed on me. The streetlight flickered again. When it sputtered back on, the figure was gone. For a moment, I felt a rush of relief, but then I froze. Suddenly, I felt a crushing weight on my chest. My arms, shoulders, and head were pinned to the bed as though some invisible force was holding me down. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It felt as if something hovered just inches above me, its breath hot against my face. Rage and malice radiated from it, but there was no body, no physical form. I was paralyzed, trapped in terror. The panic was overwhelming, like nothing I'd ever felt. I don't know how long it lasted, but the next thing I knew, the blaring alarm woke me, and sunlight poured in through the window. I lay there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it a nightmare, sleep paralysis, or something worse? Whatever it was, the fear stayed with me, and it's a memory I can't shake. I was just a little kid when I had my first brush with things I couldn't explain. My parents, though, would always brush it off. They thought telling me that ghosts weren't real would keep me from being scared, but it didn't work that way. For years, I was terrified of my own room because of the presence I felt there, something heavy in the air that I couldn't escape. Looking back now, I really wish they had handled it differently, especially after I found out my mom had believed in ghosts all along. She even admitted that sometimes the house felt off. It's frustrating, but it's too late to change anything now. Before I dive into the rest of the story, I want to share a quick memory of my mom. When I was younger, I didn't want to stay in Sunday school with the other kids. One of the teachers took me to the main hall, where the congregation was. I remember standing at the back, looking at the rows of pews filled with people, and I couldn't spot my mom anywhere. Panic crept in because I thought she wasn't there. And then, I heard it. A soft, distinct cough that only she could make. Just like that, I knew exactly where she was. It's funny how something so small can leave such a lasting impression. That ability to recognize someone by a tiny, unique sound. It'll matter in a minute. But this story isn't about my mom or that house. It's about my dad and the house he bought after my parents divorced when I was about 7. After the divorce, my dad bought a new house for him, my brother, and me. Years later, something strange happened that started with a dream my aunt had. In the dream, our grandpa, her father, appeared, emerging from a swirl of mist. He told her, "Take your brother Danny to the hospital. He doesn't want to go, but he has to." The dream felt so real that as soon as she woke up, she rushed to my dad's house, insisting he get checked out by a doctor. My dad, though, hated hospitals. He always said they didn't help people. They just made them worse. He never went to the doctor, barely took care of himself. Junk food, soda, no exercise. Still, my aunt managed to drag him to the hospital, likely because, As the youngest of 5 siblings, he was used to just going along with whatever the others said. At the hospital, the doctors told him he was just weeks away from a major heart attack. When I got the call from my grandma that he was in the hospital, I wasn't surprised. Sure, I was upset, especially when I realized that losing my parents was just a matter of time, whether now or years from now, but I wasn't shocked. His health had been in steady decline for years. I remembered how his speech had slurred, like his mouth was full of cotton, and how slow he was to respond in conversations. I was more surprised to hear he was still alive than to hear he was in the hospital. Unfortunately, he didn't last much longer. After about a week in the hospital, they released him, and he seemed determined to make some changes. When I visited him, he looked better than he had in years, clearer, more energized. But just a week after I left, he had a heart attack and ended up back in the hospital. This time, he stayed for nearly a month. I was on my way to see him when I got the call that he had passed away. I don't remember if it was before or after the funeral, but soon after, my brother and I decided to try to keep up one of our dad's old routines. Every Wednesday, he used to bring home bags of hot dogs from a stand near our house. They sold them for $0.25 each, and he'd grab $6 worth, just enough for us to have hot dogs and fries together in the living room. My brother and I decided we'd carry on the tradition, even though it felt wrong without him. That Wednesday, we left the front door open, the screen door locked, just to let in the evening breeze. As we sat down to eat, we heard footsteps. My brother and I froze, eyes locking. We didn't need to say anything. We both knew. The footsteps sounded exactly like our dad's. The two-note rhythm of his cowboy boots hitting the floor, the steady pacing. We rushed to the door, but when we opened it, the footsteps stopped. There was no one there. The street was empty. I stepped outside and looked around, but everything was still. I went back inside, and we ate in silence. That was just the beginning. After that night, strange things started happening. The front door would just pop open around noon and again at 6 p.m., his usual times for leaving and coming home. It wasn't violent or dramatic, just a soft click, the door opening a bit. I hated closing it at noon. It felt like I was shutting him out. This went on for weeks. Even after I moved out, my brother told me it still kept happening. I haven't been back to that house in years. There was a falling out with my dad's side of the family, so I've kept my distance. My brother still lives there though, and he says the door still opens by itself. My aunts have even mentioned feeling his presence around the house. I like to think that it's him, still making his rounds, checking in on us like he always did. Whether it's the door creaking open, the sound of footsteps echoing in the house, or just that feeling in the air, I hope he's still out there, somehow keeping watch over us. It's strange but comforting in its own way. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he's really gone, or if he's just somewhere else, in a place we can't see, making sure we're okay. My mom, a single mother working hard to make ends meet, had always struggled to provide for us. So when she finally managed to afford a house for the 3 of us, she was over the moon. It was a far cry from the rundown apartments we'd spent most of our lives in, and we were eager to settle in. But there was something strange about the house from the start. My younger sister's room had 4 locks on the inside of the door, which struck us as odd. The room had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, like it had once belonged to a small child. But why would any child need so many locks? The thought alone felt unnerving. To make things even stranger, we found a pair of real police handcuffs on a shelf in the pantry, right next to the cereal. Definitely an odd place to store something like that. Still, we shrugged it off and pressed on, excited about the new start. For a while, things were pretty smooth. One evening during dinner, I decided to bring up something that had been bothering me for years. I have this strange gift, or curse, depending on how you look at it. I can feel when someone's time is coming. It's a sensation, like a warning that washes over me just before someone dies. It's hard to explain, but when it happens, I feel an overwhelming urge to focus on that person, to try and capture as much of their essence as I can before they're gone. And within days, something always happens. A heart attack, a car crash, an overdose, something fatal. It's always been like that, and it freaks me out. I apologize for bringing it up, but this time was different. I wasn't sensing anyone specific. It felt like something was coming for our family, something dark. I couldn't shake the dread, and soon after we received a death threat from my mom's ex. Her ex, a man I've never liked, had been a nightmare for us when I was younger. We thought he was out of our lives for good, but when his elderly mother needed help with her living will, my mom, ever kind-hearted, agreed to help. He twisted her good intentions, accusing her of trying to steal his inheritance. That's when things took a darker turn. He threatened her life, and that's when I think the curse on our home began. We quickly got a restraining order, swapped our car for something unrecognizable, and even had a friend act as a temporary bodyguard. That's when the chaos started. Things, both spiritual and physical, began to unravel. After the death threat, the three of us developed pneumonia, and no matter what we did, it wouldn't go away. We joked about how my moaning in my sleep put the moan in pneumonia, but it wasn't funny. We discovered that fiberglass insulation had blown into the air ducts, and we'd been breathing it in. We had to replace all the air ducts and the air conditioner, which sent my mom into even more debt. As if that wasn't enough, my mom started sleeping on the couch downstairs so she could keep an eye on both the front and back doors in case her ex tried to break in. One night, she had a dream where she was being crushed by a demon. She woke up, but every time she fell back asleep, the dream returned relentless. By morning, she felt like she'd been in a physical fight. I tried to reassure her that it was just stress, but soon, I started having strange dreams too. In my dream, I was lying in my bed, just like I was in real life, which made it hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. I saw a man coming up the stairs. He had blonde hair and a goatee, looking like someone in his 40s. He felt connected to the house, like he had something to do with the construction. And he was coming upstairs for one reason, to hurt someone. He reached my doorway before I woke up in a full panic attack. Before this dream, my sister and I had already noticed how terrifying the stairs felt at night. We both tried to go to bed before one another to avoid having to climb them alone. It always felt like someone was right behind us watching. After my dream, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man I saw was the same one we both sensed in the dark. Later, we found out from a neighbor that someone had been assaulted by an intruder in the house years ago. It wasn't just us who were affected. Our pets were too. One of our cats, a sweet, cream-colored male, became obsessed with clawing at the front door, yowling to be let out. He scratched at it so much his paws bled, and eventually, we had to rehome him. It broke my sister's heart. When we visited him later, he was acting like a normal cat again. Our dogs started peeing in the house, and our larger dog, my best friend, developed terminal cancer. I try not to think that the house had anything to do with it, but the thought lingers. One day, I brought home a frog toy for the dogs. It croaked when squeezed, and they quickly chewed out the mechanism. But weeks later, as I sat on the couch talking to my sister, we heard the frog speak from under the couch. It wasn't the croak. It spoke a full sentence, one we couldn't understand. Another night, as I was falling asleep, I felt something approach from behind. It was like nothing I had ever felt before, pure evil. It was so thick, so malevolent, I couldn't bring myself to turn around. Instead, I began praying, and thankfully, the presence faded away. The house continued to drain us. We found feces under the carpets, which had to be replaced. The pantry door, once a simple wooden panel, began to show the face of an old man with a beard. One day, when I was downstairs and my sister was upstairs, we both heard a girl shout, "Mom," from the living room. We both thought the other had called out, but neither of us had. In the end, the mounting problems forced us to leave and move in with my grandfather. His house was peaceful, no haunting, no curse, but my sister did have a strange experience there. We had a priest bless the home, including our pets, and now I have a small exorcism prayer I can say when things feel off. I've only used it once, but it worked perfectly. I hope the curse is behind us, but the memory of that house still lingers. like a bad dream that never fully fades. It was 2008 when my nephew Tyler turned 6. We celebrated with a joyful birthday party filled with laughter, cake, and excitement. But about 2 weeks later, on the night of August 1, something happened that I can never forget. That night, I left the door to my bedroom open, allowing my niece, Emma, the freedom to come and go as she pleased. She had the choice to sleep with me or my mom, her grandma. We kept the kitchen light on as always, casting a soft glow that filtered into the living room just outside my room. To the right of the living room was the kitchen, forming a cozy, familiar layout. I was lying in bed, my eyes closed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard the faint sound of footsteps in the living room. At first, I assumed it was my mom or Emma, but the steps were light, almost like a child's. I glanced at the clock. It was 4:09 a.m. I stayed still, watching through the dim light as a shadow moved across my doorway. In a few seconds, I saw Tyler walking toward the dining room. My heart skipped a beat. Why was he up at this hour? Quietly, I got up and tiptoed to the doorway, watching him walk slowly toward the front door. He opened it but didn't step outside. Instead, he stood there, staring into the night. I froze, unsure of what to do. He remained there for what felt like an eternity, 38 minutes to be exact. Then, as if sensing my presence, he turned his head toward the doorway. His eyes locked with mine, and in an instant, he collapsed to the floor, crying uncontrollably. I rushed to him, scooping him into my arms. He sobbed, his small body trembling in my embrace, until he eventually fell asleep again. My mom and dad came running out of their rooms, alarmed by the commotion. I reassured them, explaining that he must have been sleepwalking. We all returned to bed, unsettled but hopeful it was an isolated incident. The next night, I had Tyler sleep in my bed for safety. I turned to wrap my arms around him, but the space next to me was empty. Panic set in as I got up and discovered the front door open again. The clock read 3:38 a.m. this time. I hurried to close the door, but as I reached for the lock, I heard soft footsteps behind me. There he was. I didn't wake him but gently took his hand and led him back to bed. He sat upright for an hour, staring at nothing, before finally lying back down and falling asleep. Over the next few nights, things became even stranger. One night, I found him standing outside in the front yard, staring at the empty street. Another time, he was standing beside my bed, motionless, like a mannequin. Each time, I would bring him back, hoping the strange phase would pass. But the final night was different, terrifying even. I woke to find him standing beside me again. The clock read 4:28 a.m. I reached out to pull him onto the bed, but when I touched him, his skin was icy cold. He turned his head toward me, and my breath caught in my throat. His eyes, they were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just an endless black void. A slow, eerie smile spread across his face, followed by a sinister grin. This was no longer my nephew. Fear gripped me as he suddenly jumped onto the bed. His movements were unnatural, animalistic. He crouched on all fours like a predator preparing to pounce, then sat upright, his black eyes never leaving mine. I backed away, trying to get to the door, but he followed me, his grin widening, revealing sharp, fang-like teeth. I was trembling, too scared to speak. He crouched lower, ready to leap. My heart broke. This wasn't my little boy, my nephew. Something else had taken over. I slid down to the floor, tears streaming down my face. He watched me, his head tilting as if he were curious. Then he moved closer, crouching in front of me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Desperate to find some trace of my nephew still in there, I reached for him. As I pulled him close, he pushed me back with a force that sent me crashing against the dresser. He hissed like a wild animal, his face inches from mine. And then, to my horror, he leaned in and licked the tears off my cheeks. I was paralyzed, unable to move. But as I stared at the floor, sobbing, I heard his voice, soft and childlike. "Auntie, why are you crying?" I looked up, and there he was, Tyler. His eyes were normal again, his face soft and innocent. It was him, my sweet nephew. I hugged him tightly, relief washing over me. "Why are we on the floor?" he asked, his voice full of confusion. I laughed through my tears, pulling him close. "Let's go back to bed," I whispered. He smiled, his little face bright and trusting, and climbed into bed with me. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, he whispered again, his voice gentle and loving. "I love you, Mommy." Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When my mother passed away unexpectedly at 55 from a heart attack, I didn't feel the overwhelming sadness most people might expect. Instead, I felt rage. For months, she'd been visiting doctors, trying to figure out what was wrong with her. She was exhausted, feeling off, but despite endless tests that cost us thousands, the doctors couldn't find a single thing. They started treating her like a hypochondriac. Anyone who knew my mom would have told you that wasn't who she was. She wasn't one to complain, and she never sought attention. The way they dismissed her felt like a betrayal. She felt invisible, like she didn't matter anymore, especially since she'd retired 4 years earlier, on her doctor's advice, because of chronic pain and high blood pressure. She'd always loved her work, and leaving it was a hard adjustment for her. A few weeks after the funeral, I found myself standing in my closet, searching for something to wear to dinner. As I was going through the hangers, I came across a blouse I didn't recognize. It was fancy, way fancier than anything I would ever wear. I froze, staring at it in confusion. Where had it come from? I didn't know what to make of it, so I brushed it off, figuring it wasn't right for a casual dinner. But even as I moved on, my thoughts kept drifting back to that blouse. I'd recently moved to a small town in upstate New York after semi-retiring. When I did, I went through all my old clothes and donated most of them. Business suits, dressy blouses, anything that didn't fit the laid-back life I'd adopted. I kept only the basics: jeans, sweatshirts, flannel shirts, and my winter gear. I hadn't bought anything new in years, so seeing this blouse hanging there, standing out against my simple wardrobe, felt all wrong. It didn't belong. After I was dressed and ready for dinner, curiosity gnawed at me. I had to take another look at that blouse. Maybe it would help explain how it ended up in my closet. My family had always been into secondhand clothes. We loved finding old treasures, designer pieces that weren't just about the brand but the craftsmanship. Over the years, we picked up things from designers like Chanel and Dior, but it was always about the feel of the fabric, the cut, the quality. Maybe this blouse was just another one of those finds. I checked the label, half expecting to see some high-end designer name, but what I found made my heart skip a beat. It read, "I love you." My chest tightened, and a chill ran down my spine. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Could this be a message from my mom? Was this her way of reaching out to me? I wanted so badly to believe it, but doubt and fear crept in. It felt too real to be a coincidence, yet too surreal to be true. I tried to convince myself it was ridiculous. There was no way, but I couldn't shake the thought. I turned it over and found the handwritten price tag from a local thrift store, confirming I had never bought or worn it. But still, the thought of my mother sending me a message of love brought a warmth I hadn't felt in weeks. I loved her more than anything, and the idea that she had left me this sign gave me a strange sense of comfort, one I desperately needed. Then, another thought took root. What if it wasn't her? What if it was something else? A trick? A ghost, perhaps, using my grief and anger to pull me in? The fear hit me hard, and I shut the idea out quickly. I didn't want to believe it, not because I didn't want to feel connected to my mom, but because I didn't want to be vulnerable. So I dismissed the thought, and with it, any comfort it could have offered. 5 years passed before I was finally able to release the anger I'd held onto after her death. And now, as time has gone on, I believe that blouse really was her way of reaching out. It wasn't a coincidence. That belief brings me peace now. I know she understands my reaction, and I'm certain that, wherever she is, she's forgiven me for not embracing it sooner. My mom was born on December 3, 1928, and passed away on December 5, 1983, when I was just 27. I miss her every single day. In March of this year, just 2 weeks after our youngest was born, my family and I moved into a new home in the small town of Silver Springs. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but we were exhausted from the chaos of the move. On the first night, we all huddled together in the master bedroom. With no furniture set up yet, the carpeted floor was our best option. It was me, my husband, and our 3 kids, all trying to make the best of it. As we settled in for the night, my 2 boys quickly fell asleep. Our baby was sound asleep in her crib, too. My husband and I lay quietly, trying to wind down after such a long, tiring day. But then, I heard it, a faint scratching sound. It reminded me of a chair being dragged across a hardwood floor. The sound came from the dining room, just outside our closed bedroom door. I froze, straining to listen, but it faded away. I whispered to my husband, asking if he'd heard it. He said he had, but he didn't seem as confused as I was. What puzzled me was that our whole family was in the same room, mostly asleep, and all of our furniture, including the dining room chairs, was still stacked up in the front room on the other side of the house. I listened carefully again, and after a few moments, the sound returned. This time, it was louder, like someone was pushing a chair back from the table. I felt uneasy, but I was so tired that I just brushed it off. When the sound didn't repeat, I managed to fall asleep. A couple of weeks later, something else strange happened. I was about to head out on an errand while my husband stayed home with the kids. My 2 boys were sitting at the dining table, eating dinner. I went into our bedroom to grab my keys, which were in the diaper bag. I also picked up my sunglasses. The key was small, black, and rectangular, about 2.5 inches long. I debated putting it in my jacket pocket, but decided against it, afraid the sunglasses might scratch it. I walked back to the dining room to talk to my husband, still holding both items. After chatting for a few minutes, I turned to leave, but when I reached for the key, it was gone. I couldn't believe it. I knew I'd been holding it just moments before. My husband and I searched everywhere, along the short path between the bedroom and dining room, under furniture, even inside the diaper bag. But the key was nowhere to be found. My boys had been quietly eating the entire time and had no idea what we were talking about. Despite checking the entire house, the key was gone. Frustrated, I convinced myself it was just mommy brain and borrowed my husband's truck instead. But over the next few weeks, I searched everywhere: boxes, trash cans, coat pockets, vents, but the key was never found. We eventually had to replace it, and it cost us an absurd amount. A month later, my husband left for a 10-day missionary trip. I always feel uneasy when he's away, so I made sure to lock everything up tight before leaving the house one afternoon. I double-checked the side door and locked the front door. When I came back, the side door was unlocked. I brushed it off, thinking I must have forgotten to double-check. A couple of days later, I left again, carefully locking the side door and deadbolt. But when I returned, the locks were undone once more. I was unsettled but convinced I was just overturned. Another strange incident happened in the master bathroom. I was fixing my hair in front of the mirror when I decided to hide a bag of candy from my kids. I placed it on the highest shelf in the cupboard, out of sight and reach, and continued getting ready. Later, I wanted a piece, but when I reached for the bag, it was gone. I searched the entire cupboard, but it was nowhere to be found. Days later, I found the bag tucked into the back of a blanket drawer in my closet, a place I would never have put it. The strangest event, though, involved my husband's dress shoes. After church one Sunday, he had placed his cream-colored shoes on the shoe rack in our closet. A week later, when he went to wear them again, they were gone. We searched everywhere, under the bed, in the front door shoe basket, but the shoes were nowhere to be found. Weeks passed, and still no sign of them. Then, one morning, after another Sunday out of town, My husband spotted the shoes back on the rack in their usual spot, as if they had never been gone. I knew they hadn't been there before. They were light-colored and hard to miss, and their absence had been obvious. My husband swore he hadn't moved them, and I knew I hadn't either. Lights I'd turned off seemed to flicker back on, and locked doors seemed to unlock themselves. Despite all these strange occurrences, I don't feel scared. The house doesn't feel threatening. If anything, it feels alive, like it has a personality all its own. Whatever is happening, I've stopped trying to make sense of it. We're happy here, and I don't plan on leaving anytime soon. Over the past 2 weeks, my son, Ethan, and I have been working to rid him of a deeply negative presence that attached itself to him. It's been a long and difficult journey, but I'll share the key moments that led to this point. Ethan has struggled with depression for years. A few years ago, I went through my own period of intense stress, threatening students at work, a stalker, and a man who threatened me and later went on to commit a murder. Although it was deemed self-defense and he was released after a year, he was eventually rearrested. The chaos took its toll on our family. Then, in October 2013, I had my first of several mini-strokes. After that, the ground fell out for Ethan. He spiraled into a deep depressive episode, and things turned very dark for him. In November, he stayed overnight at a friend's house. They played games, including Cards Against Humanity, laughing well into the night. It was the kind of therapy he needed, and it helped lift his spirits. But after everyone else went to bed, he heard a girl laughing softly in the living room. He knew no one was still up, yet the laughter moved closer, almost like it was following him into his room. He didn't feel scared. Instead, he felt that she was his age and shy, maybe even a bit lonely. He didn't realize how vulnerable he was. Perhaps his depression had made him an open channel. Eventually, he invited her to come home with him. At first, everything seemed fine. Ethan was more upbeat, and I dismissed the subtle feeling that something was wrong. But as time passed, his depression grew worse. He went through a never-ending cycle of medications, each one either adjusted or replaced until his body couldn't take it anymore. In early February, he was even hospitalized. We joked about it, calling it the loony bin, but it was no laughing matter. They balanced his meds, but the stability didn't last long. Even after 6 weeks of intensive therapy, he could still hear her. We began questioning whether she was real or just a figment of his mind. But the more we asked, the less clear it became. By April, Ethan's suicidal thoughts resurfaced. One evening, he stood by the train tracks, ready to end it all. That's when she spoke to him, the voice that had been following him. She convinced him to stay. I thought she was helping, but now I realized she was feeding off him. By June, things had spiraled again, and I knew we had to get rid of her. I turned to an old ritual I had learned, the cleansing method that had helped me before. I was well prepared, having used these methods for years. My bedroom already had 6 selenite wands, creating a protective aura. The night Ethan was visiting his friends, I began the ritual. I made blessed water, gathered salt, and prepared to salt the property. At around 1:30 a.m., Ethan called me. He said he felt like something was watching him and added, "I wonder why she can't see it." That was when I knew for sure the problem was her. I feared how he would react to letting her go, but thankfully he had already started to question her intentions. I hurriedly salted the perimeter of our property, sprinkling holy water as I went. Then I drove the 35 miles to pick him up. On the way home, we talked openly about what had to happen. As we neared the house, he heard a voice, an ugly voice, say, "So, this is how you repay me." That's when I knew it wasn't some sweet, innocent ghost. It was something much darker. The plan was for Ethan to push her away as we backed into the driveway, now lined with salt. But that night, he didn't sleep well. She was still there, lingering in his mind. By Tuesday, I knew we needed to do more. I bought a large bag of salt from Home Depot, and this time, Ethan and I cleansed the house together. We salted the property, sprinkled more blessed water, and he even took a long salt bath with rosemary to cleanse himself. I added 6 more selenite wands to his room and performed daily healing rituals to help restore his energy. The process was exhausting, physically and emotionally. But we did it, and when he visited his friends again, we were relieved to feel that he came back unchanged. That room at his friend's house seemed to draw trouble. The last 2 people who stayed there had emotional breakdowns. One even hid in the closet for days before anyone found him. This entity had been feeding on people for some time. It had attached itself to Ethan, draining his energy, deepening his depression, and pushing him toward the edge. Now I wonder if I missed something. Should I be resalting the property regularly? We're not out of the woods with Ethan's depression yet, but now that this entity is gone, I hope he'll finally begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's been a long, painful road, but the lesson is clear. Be very careful what you invite into your life. I've lived in Arizona my whole life, and my family's been here since the early 70s. My parents bought an acre of land in the West Valley, and with the help of relatives and friends, my dad built the house we grew up in. It's the only house we've ever had, and as far as I know, we're the only ones who've ever lived there. What was on the land before we built is something I can only guess at, but with the area's history, it wouldn't be too surprising if there were old Native American burial grounds nearby. In this part of the country, that seems to be the story behind a lot of haunted places. I come from a big family. There are 11 of us, and over the years, more than one of us, including my mom, has had some unexplainable experiences in that house. One day, my mom shared something that happened when I was younger. She was a stay-at-home mom, and most of us were at school. She was upstairs doing some chores when she felt something strange. There are 2 rooms up there, separated by a curtain instead of a door. She was in one room when, all of a sudden, she felt like someone was standing in the other room. She hesitated but finally pulled the curtain back, only to find that the room was empty. My older sister V, I'm the 9th of 11, used to sleep in that room. When she was a teenager, she started hearing someone calling her name at night. After B went off to college, my younger sister R moved into the same room. She often noticed things going missing, only to find them again in places she had already checked. When B was in high school, she used to go to early morning church classes, so she was always the first one awake. One morning, as she was getting ready, she heard the blow dryer clicking. Something it only did after it had been used, but she was the only one up. Then she heard the front door open and close, but when she checked, the door was still locked. I didn't have my own strange experience until I was in college. I had early classes, and one morning, after getting ready, I lay down for a bit before leaving. As I was resting, I felt something walking on my bed, like a cat. We had a cat at the time, but he wasn't in my room. And before that, we'd never kept indoor pets. It was so strange. Later, my mom told me she'd felt the same thing in that room, even years later, like a cat walking on her bed. Our first indoor-outdoor cat, Spook, used to jump onto the kitchen window ledge and bat at the screen whenever he wanted back inside. After Spook passed away, my mom would still hear the sound of something batting at the screen occasionally. Now that I'm married and have children of my own, I've had my share of experiences in that house. For a while, we lived there while my husband was finishing school, and my mom watched the kids during the day. My sister, T, often says she feels like someone's watching her from the living room. My kids have pointed into that room and said, "Ghost." I've felt the same thing, that eerie feeling of being watched from the living room. But the most unsettling experience I had was in the room we were staying in at the time, which had once been my grandmother's. She passed away the year before, but the presence I felt didn't feel like hers. My middle child was only 2 at the time, and we had this nightly routine where I'd sing her 3 psalms and pray with her. For weeks, I felt like something was standing at the foot of the bed, watching us. It was so uncomfortable. Eventually, I asked my husband to bless the room and make it go away. In our faith, anyone can cast out spirits in Christ's name, so he did. It didn't go away immediately, but after a week or 2, I realized the feeling was gone. I was so relieved. There were other strange things, too. One day, our back porch was mysteriously swept clean. When my grandmother was alive, she took great care in sweeping that porch every day, so it felt like her presence was still there. We also often heard footsteps upstairs, and things would vanish, only to reappear in strange places. One time, I lost my biology test outline. It just disappeared and was never found. We all agree that there's probably a ghost cat or two in the house. Most of the time, the presence feels harmless. People have suggested trying to communicate with it or recording EVPs, but honestly, that kind of thing scares me way too much. For now, we're content to let the mysteries of the house remain just that, mysteries. This year, I had the chance to tour some of the historic homes and landmarks in my hometown with a close friend. It was something I had wanted to do for years, even though it wasn't quite as thrilling as the Haunted Homes tour they hold every October. Still, it was an incredible opportunity. People in town opened their private homes to curious visitors, and a few of the older locations, owned by the local historical society, were only accessible for tours on this one day each year. I'm an empath, though it's something I've struggled to accept. I often feel the presence of spirits. Sometimes I sense their emotions, and on rare occasions, I get impressions of their lives, their gender, and even their age. These encounters affect me physically, which is why I'm usually hesitant about tours like this, no matter how fascinating they might be. Out of all the homes on the tour, only a few had any real activity, but one house in particular stood out to me. The house was nestled quietly down a narrow residential road, not far from one of the main streets. Like most of the homes on the tour, it had been renovated over time to fit modern standards, with a few additions here and there. But unlike the others, which had been stripped of all their history, this house still held onto some of its original charm. It was when my friend and I approached the house that the unease began to settle in. There was a strange heat radiating from the front door, not physical heat, but something much more intense, like standing too close to a bonfire on a chilly night. It wasn't comfortable. At the same time, there was this magnetic pull in the middle of my chest, like something invisible was trying to draw me into the house. It wasn't a pleasant feeling, and as we moved closer, it only grew stronger. When we crossed the threshold, I hoped the feeling would fade, or that I would be able to sense a specific spirit. But instead, the pull became overwhelming. Every doorway, every arch, and every window seemed to hum with energy, each tugging at me, making my stomach churn. I wanted to leave immediately, but my friend, who's older and quite skeptical, had no idea about my sensitivity to spirits. I didn't want to risk her teasing or disbelief, so I tried to push through it. The only clear spirit I could sense was a young boy sitting on the stairs, just inside the front door. The stairs had been roped off to keep people from going upstairs, but he sat about 6 steps up, one hand resting on the railing. He looked to be around 10 or 11, with messy brown hair parted neatly down the middle. I didn't see him the way you'd see a living person, but the image came to me intuitively. I felt his presence strongly, more so than usual. I think it was because of the sheer intensity of the energy in the house. As I ventured deeper into the house, the feeling of discomfort grew. It felt like every door and window was pulling energy in, pushing it out, or swirling it around in chaotic patterns. It was disorienting, like the house itself was spinning. I've always avoided places that are known for being portals for spirits because I've suspected they'd make me dizzy, and this was no exception. The energy in that house was overwhelming, and I fought to keep from getting sick right there. Thankfully, we stepped out into the backyard for a short break, which gave me a moment to catch my breath. But to leave, we had to go back through the house, and by then, I was so nauseous that I thought I might pass out. I still don't know what caused the house to feel this way. Maybe it had always been like that, or perhaps recent renovations or meddling with spiritual energy had triggered it. Either way, it was clear there was some portal activity going on. My friend, noticing that I didn't look too well, asked if I was okay, but she still doesn't know the truth. I've never told her about my sensitivity to spirits, and I think I'll keep it that way for now. Experiences like this are hard enough to process on my own, let alone try to explain to someone who might not understand. In the late summer of 2012, around August or September, my family decided it was time for a fresh start. At the time, it was me, my sister, her husband, and their 2 kids. We had been thinking about moving to a new place, so we set our sights on a small town in the Arizona desert, somewhere near Phoenix, but we weren't sure which neighborhood was the right fit. We spent a weekend there, exploring the area, trying to decide where we would settle down. That meant a few nights in a hotel. The usual setup. My sister and her husband shared a bed, the kids took the other, and I ended up on the fold-out couch in the small front room of the suite. I've never liked sleeping in total darkness, but this room was pitch black. There wasn't even a clock to give me a sense of time. I remember drifting off to sleep close to 11, but after that, everything felt strange and time slipped away from me. Sometime in the night, I woke up to an odd humming sound. At first, I thought it was someone vacuuming above us, maybe the hotel staff working late to clean the floors. I brushed it off and tried to go back to sleep, but the humming grew louder, and it was relentless. I thought maybe the cleaning crew was moving closer, but the sound kept increasing in intensity, and it didn't stop. It became impossible to ignore. Just when it felt like the noise might make my ears start ringing, I felt the bed shift behind me. I had been lying on my side, facing away from the door, so the movement came from behind my knees. It felt exactly like when a cat jumps onto the bed. I've grown up with cats, so I knew that feeling all too well. For a moment, I even thought maybe my cat had snuck in and was trying to settle beside me like he always did. But then it hit me. I wasn't at home, and my cats were miles away, being taken care of by a friend. The realization sent a cold chill through my body. When I tried to turn around to look, the weight on the bed disappeared. At the same time, an intense burning sensation shot across my back, from one hip to the other. It was sharp, unyielding, and I couldn't move a muscle. What made it worse was that I couldn't stop staring at a specific spot on the wall in front of me. There, in the darkness, was a tiny light, just a small, steady dot, like the beam from a laser pointer. It didn't flicker or move. It just hovered there in the quiet room. The humming noise didn't stop. In fact, it seemed to intensify, growing louder and more piercing until I thought it might burst my eardrums. My body refused to obey me. I couldn't move, couldn't look away from that light. My mind was racing, but my body remained frozen. I remembered something my mother used to tell me when I was scared as a child, to focus and calm myself. So I silently began telling myself that I was safe, that nothing had any power over me, and that nothing could hurt me. Eventually, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The room felt ordinary again, like any other hotel room. But when I looked at the spot on the wall where the light had been, there was nothing there. No lamp, no smoke detector, no clock, no painting. Nothing that could have caused or reflected the light I had been staring at in the darkness. To this day, I have no idea what happened that night, but I know I wasn't alone in that room. I just wish I understood what it was. The first time I visited the Black Hills, I only stopped at a few of the scenic overlooks on the north side. Each time I stepped out of my car, a deep sense of dread and death washed over me. It was a heavy, oppressive feeling, and I couldn't understand why it was so strong. When I drove over to the south side, though, everything changed. The sensation lifted, and I felt safer, more at ease as I gazed out from the overlooks there. That evening, I set up my tent at the campground with my dog, Bella. I was sitting at the picnic table under the soft glow of the lantern, writing in my journal, when Bella began tugging on her leash, which was tied to my wrist. She was pulling toward the car. I called her back, trying to calm her, petting her until she sat beside me again. But a few minutes later, she tugged hard on the leash again, nearly yanking me toward the car. That's when I said, "I feel the same way." We're sleeping in the car tonight. I never returned to the Black Hills for years after that, the place leaving me with an unsettling feeling I couldn't shake. About 4 years later, I joined a bird watching and camping trip with 2 friends. We were traveling through northern Arizona and into New Mexico, making our way toward the Taos area. One of them suggested a visit to the Black Hills, and I immediately said no. But then I thought about confronting my fear. I suggested we hire a guide, climb into the canyon, camp overnight, and then head back the next morning. And that's exactly what we did. As we sat by the fire with our guide in the canyon, I asked him about the area's history. He explained that the northern part of the canyon was known as Dead Man's Canyon, while the southern side was called the Spirit Canyon. I hadn't realized they were two distinct canyons. He told me that during the 1800s, settlers, led by General George Armstrong Custer, had wiped out a peaceful tribe living in the northern canyon, and those who survived had escaped to the southern side. I mentioned the eerie feeling I had years ago at the campground and asked him about it. He explained that the campground was built over an old burial ground, where many of the tribe's ancestors were laid to rest. After we climbed back out of the canyon, we returned to the same campground. Just as before, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my tent. I ended up in the car once again. The following year, I camped with my boyfriend at a powwow on a reservation in Oklahoma. On the second night, while lying in the tent, a native man appeared to me in a vision. He reached for my right hand, pulling me toward him, and kept telling me to come with him. I refused, saying, "I'm here with Rob, and I'm not going anywhere with you." He tugged harder, but I yanked my arm away, wrapped it around Rob, and the man vanished. In the morning, I told Rob what had happened. He froze and admitted that the first night we camped there, a native woman had visited him, trying to seduce him with kisses. But at one point, she looked up at him, and her face had changed into a man's. He hadn't wanted to tell me because it frightened him so much. A year or two later, I traveled solo to the famous ruins at Canyon de Chelly in northern Arizona. I had planned to camp near the nearby town of Window Rock, but this time, I decided it was time to face my fear of the Black Hills. I drove to the campground, arriving just before sunset. While walking around, I met a woman who was camping alone for the first time. I felt a little embarrassed. Here I was, an experienced camper, unable to sleep in my tent at this place, while she seemed perfectly calm. After dark, I pitched my tent, wrote in my journal for a while, and then settled in for the night. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the same disturbing encounter that Rob had in Oklahoma. A native man was trying to seduce me, whispering that I should come with him. This time, I spoke aloud. "Oh, please. You can't do better than that. I know exactly how this ends." As soon as I said that, he disappeared. Later that night, I woke up needing to use the bathroom, which was unusual for me. I grabbed my dim headlamp and made my way to the nearby restroom. I didn't turn on the light inside to avoid waking the other campers. As I began using the restroom, the door slammed open and then shut again. The stalls beside me slammed shut as well. I froze. There was no way anyone could have moved that fast. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of water rushing into the stalls next to me. It wasn't the sound of someone urinating. It was something far more unsettling. I crouched down to look under the stalls, but there were no feet. When I finished and washed my hands, I walked back to my tent, muttering, "Okay, that was a little better." No one ever came out of the bathroom, and the light never came on. Surprisingly, after that, I had no trouble sleeping in my tent. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. A few years back, I worked at a small hospital in a remote town in Arizona. The building itself was old and worn, with only about 15 patient rooms arranged in an L shape. The nurses' station sat at the corner where the two hallways met. At the end of one hallway, a set of double doors led to a newer section of the hospital, an abandoned surgical unit that had been closed for years. At first, I didn't think much of it. My shifts were always busy, and I didn't have the energy to notice much else. But after a while, curiosity began to gnaw at me. How often does one get the chance to explore a forgotten, closed-off part of a hospital. One day, I decided to see it for myself. To give you some context, I've never been one to believe in the paranormal. I've stayed in places people claim are haunted, only to feel nothing out of the ordinary. Even when strange things happen, I always manage to explain them away. So as I pushed open those double doors, I didn't expect anything to be different. The doors opened into an airlock, a small, sterile space with another set of doors leading into the surgical unit itself. The place was mostly empty, aside from some old medical equipment left behind. There were counters and cabinets along the walls and a large, open room at the center. Toward the back, a hallway branched off, leading to smaller rooms along the sides. It looked like any other abandoned place, silent and still. Too still. But as I walked deeper into the room, I felt something shift. It's hard to describe, but the air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me from all sides. It wasn't like being watched. It was more suffocating than that. A weight in the room that I couldn't shake. The further I walked, the more oppressive it became. I had planned to explore the back hallway, to see those smaller rooms, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. There was this overwhelming urge to leave, and I listened to it. I wasn't in there long, maybe just a few minutes. No sounds, no figures, but the feeling stayed with me long after I left. I couldn't understand why I'd reacted so strongly to what, on the surface, seemed like just another empty wing of the hospital. Over the next few months, I heard rumors from other staff. Some spoke of hearing voices that weren't there. Patients often claimed they saw figures walking in and out of their rooms at night, even when no one was around. Some would even ask to be moved to another bed just to avoid being alone. And there were stories of knocks on windows, which seemed plausible since the hospital was on the ground floor. For me, the only strange thing I ever encountered was a hand sanitizer dispenser that went off by itself one night. It startled me, but I assumed it was just a malfunction. I worked a lot of night shifts, and nothing really spooked me, except for that one time in the surgical unit. After that, I only went back into that wing once, and that was to help another staff member who needed something from there, but was too scared to go alone. I stayed at the nurse's station the rest of the time. 6 months later, I was chatting with a veteran staff member who had worked there for years. They told me that the surgical unit had been shut down 6 years ago after a tragic incident. A woman who was undergoing a cesarean section had bled to death, and both the surgeon and the hospital were held responsible. I'm not sure if that tragedy had anything to do with the way I felt, but it's an experience I've never been able to shake. It wasn't the most terrifying thing to happen, but it was strange, and I've never experienced anything quite like it since. As a kid, I was always terrified of things that went bump in the night. It all started when I was about 4 or 5, after my parents divorced in 1965. My mom raised my younger brother and me on her own, and I guess the split left me feeling insecure, making me more anxious about everything. I didn't see ghosts or anything of that sort. Mostly, it was just noises. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps outside my window when we lived in an apartment, and later, I'd swear I heard someone walking down the hallway, even though no one was there. But something always seemed to make me uneasy, like a quiet dread that never fully left me. When I was 5, my mom moved us from Texas to Arizona, and we stayed with my grandparents for a while. One morning, I woke up on the floor next to the bed. I figured I must have fallen off during the night, but that didn't scare me. But there's one night I'll never forget. I woke up in a panic, heart racing. My bed was shaking, intermittently, but enough to make me scream for my aunt. She came in, laid down next to me, and held me until I calmed down, and the shaking stopped. She told me I'd just had a nightmare, and I believed her. But looking back now, I know I wasn't dreaming. Even now, I can't explain why my bed shook like that. And since this happened in Mesa, Arizona, it wasn't likely an earthquake. Fast forward 10 years. My mom remarried, and my stepdad adopted my brother and me. We moved into a new ranch-style home. Nothing old or creepy. It was a typical tract house in the suburbs of Phoenix, built during the 1960s boom. Still, I'd get spooked sometimes, especially by what I thought were footsteps in the hallway. But I chalked it up to the house settling or the heating system kicking on. Then, in 1974, something happened that truly terrified me. My stepdad was overseas for work, and I was a freshman in high school. My mom started leaving the kitchen light on at night, casting a soft glow down the hallway. I slept with my door open, and the light was comforting. One night, I woke up suddenly. My little red travel alarm clock read 1:20 a.m. For some reason. I glanced toward my open door and froze. On the hallway wall outside my room, I saw the distinct shadow of a human figure. It wasn't just a vague shape. It looked like someone moving slowly toward my bedroom door. Then I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the carpet. I was frozen with fear. At that moment, I didn't think I was seeing a ghost. I thought someone had broken into our house. I was too terrified to scream or move. I just lay there, waiting for the figure to step into my doorway. But it didn't. Instead, the shadow stopped, then slowly faded away. When I finally found the courage to move, I ran across the hallway, which was empty, and into my mom's room. I woke her up and told her what I'd seen, but half asleep, she brushed it off as my imagination. I spent the rest of the night in her room, though I couldn't sleep well. In the morning, we checked all the doors and windows, and they were locked. I didn't think much of it after that. About a year later, after my stepdad returned, I woke up late one Saturday night. I heard someone moving around in the kitchen and saw their shadow on the hallway wall, just like before. I figured it was my stepdad. He had a habit of falling asleep on the couch after the TV stations signed off for the night, leaving only static on the screen. I assumed he'd woken up to go to bed, but when I got up to check, the kitchen was empty. At the far end of the room, in the family area, my stepdad was still sound asleep on the couch, snoring. The TV was showing static, and it looked like he hadn't moved in hours. That's when the unease set in. What I'd just seen didn't make sense. I went back to my room, trying to ignore it, but the feeling lingered. Since then, I haven't had any more encounters with shadow figures. Honestly, I'd probably dismiss the idea of the paranormal altogether if it weren't for the stories I've heard from friends and family. Still, what I saw all those years ago was too real to ignore. It's something I'll never forget, and I still don't have an explanation for it. In the summer of 1982, when I was 14, my family lived in a modest ranch-style home, a typical suburban house built during the late 70s on the outskirts of a quiet town in Arizona. My parents had purchased it new as part of a growing neighborhood on the edge of the desert. At the time, my dad was stationed overseas in Japan with the Navy, so it was just me, my mom, and my little brother at home. My mom had this strange habit of leaving the kitchen light on at night, even though our neighborhood was always peaceful and secure. Maybe it made her feel more at ease, like a small comfort. I, on the other hand, preferred to leave my bedroom door open. Closing it felt too suffocating, as if it sealed me off from the world. My room was at the end of the hallway, with my brother's room just a few steps away, and my parents' room across the hall from mine. One night, I woke up abruptly. The room was pitch black except for the faint glow from the kitchen light. I glanced at my clock. 1:20 a.m., something felt off, like the air was thicker, heavier. I turned my head toward the door, which stood wide open, the dim hallway stretching into the darkness. That's when I saw it. A shadow, long and unnaturally shaped, appeared against the wall in the hallway. It looked like a person, but it wasn't just standing still. It was moving. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dreaming. I could hear the faint rustle of footsteps against the carpet as it slowly crept toward my door. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. Fear gripped me, pinning me to my bed. I lay there, eyes wide, staring at the shadow as it grew closer. My pulse thudded in my ears. I remember thinking, someone's in the house. That's when the panic set in. I was sure an intruder had slipped in while we slept, creeping closer to my room. I braced myself for the moment when they would appear in the doorway. But that moment never came. The shadow stopped. It faded, blending with the darkness in the hallway as if it never existed. I lay there, motionless, my mind racing, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. It felt like time had stretched out into something unnatural, as if the room itself was holding its breath. After what felt like an eternity, I finally gathered the courage to jump out of bed and race across the hall to my mom's room. She was half awake when I told her. It was just a bad dream, she said, brushing it off. But I wasn't convinced. I crawled into bed beside her, still feeling the cold dread clutching my chest. The rest of the night passed in restless sleep. By morning, I tried to shake it off, checking every door and window to make sure everything was locked. I told myself it had been my imagination, but I can still recall every detail, clear as day. A few months later, my dad returned home from his assignment. He worked the night shift, so on his days off, he often stayed up late watching TV in the family room. Back then, cable wasn't as common, and late-night TV would just go to static once the broadcasts ended. It wasn't unusual for my dad to fall asleep in front of the TV. One night, nearly a year after the first incident, I woke up again. The sound of someone walking around in the hallway caught my attention. I glanced toward the door and saw a shadow, just like before, moving along the wall. This time, I wasn't frightened. I figured it was just my dad, coming to bed after falling asleep on the couch. But after a few moments, I realized something wasn't right. My dad never passed my door on his way to the bedroom. Curious, I got up and walked into the family room. My dad was still asleep on the couch, the static from the TV flickering softly in the background. He hadn't moved an inch. That's when the realization hit me. The shadow I had seen wasn't my dad. A cold, familiar wave of fear washed over me. The same icy dread I had felt the first time, the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I didn't know what else to do, so I went back to my room, crawled back into bed, and tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I grew up in a small town in Georgia with my parents and 6 siblings. Our house always had a strange feeling to it, like something was watching us. My earliest memories are of sharing a bedroom with my younger sister, and even though we had bunk beds, we both felt uneasy in that room. The closet in particular was terrifying. It always seemed like it stretched on forever, as if there were some dark, endless space hiding behind it. Even now, just thinking about it makes my stomach drop. We often felt like we weren't alone in the house. There was one presence we could feel most of all, something we never saw but always sensed. We called it the man in the shadows. He was tall, and though he never showed himself, you could feel his looming presence, especially in the late hours of the night. But then, there was also a mischievous spirit, a little boy who we named the boy in the blue and white striped shirt. He wasn't scary, but he loved playing tricks on us. He'd hide things or move them around, which would cause arguments among the kids. It always felt like something was just out of reach, like we could never find what we needed when we needed it. In the foyer, we had a large mirror, about 6 feet tall. I remember always feeling like I wasn't the only one looking into it. Shadows would pass by quickly, flickering across the glass. They were so fleeting, so fast, that you'd wonder if you imagined them. And every night, right at 10:13, without fail, the toilet in the kids' bathroom would flush on its own. None of us dared to go in there alone after dark, so we'd always make someone come with us if we needed to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. Across the street from our house was a 2-acre abandoned farm. The farmhouse sat there, its windows always empty but never really still. No matter what time of day it was, morning, afternoon, or night, there was always someone, or something, standing in one of the windows. Our kitchen window faced the front of that farm, and whenever my brother and I were doing dishes, it was a struggle to even glance out. When I was 10, I discovered that my brother, who was 9 at the time, had seen the same things I had. One evening, as I was washing dishes, I looked out the kitchen window and saw an old car pull up. It was shiny and black, almost out of place for the time period, something from the 1930s, maybe. A woman stepped out, wearing an old-fashioned wide hoop dress, and her red curly hair flowed behind her as if the wind was blowing even though it wasn't. She took one step forward and then disappeared. Gone, just like that. The next night, it was my brother's turn to do the dishes. The next day, he came to me in tears, begging our mom not to make him do it again. That's when I realized he had seen her too. From that night on, neither of us would look out that window while doing the dishes. I lived in that house until I got married at 25, but the eerie feeling never left. The man in the shadows, the little boy, whatever they were always there, lurking, keeping us frightened. At night, we'd hide under the covers, always aware of the cold air that seemed to follow us wherever we went in the house. We never stayed in the house alone if we could help it. When I was 21, I started dating a guy named Mark, and one evening, he came over to visit. After sitting on the sofa, he later told me that he felt something grab him by the throat. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as if some invisible force was holding him there. The next day he called me, sounding shaken, and said his mother had warned him never to return to the house. She told him that her sister had been murdered there, back before we moved in. The sister had been a beautician who had added a large room to the house. That room later became my brother's bedroom, and it was the same room our dog, Smokey, refused to enter. Smokey would stand at the doorway, growling and barking, but never cross the threshold. By the time I had a daughter, my husband was assigned to a year-long military post, and I decided to stay with my parents. My daughter was still little and just starting to talk. Her first words, however, would scare anyone. She'd point at nothing and ask, "What's that?" It always made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Her first Easter, I bought her a pair of white patent leather shoes. I placed them by the door the night before, but by Easter morning they were gone. We searched high and low, closets, drawers, even under the beds, but the shoes were nowhere to be found. Months later, when my husband came back and we moved to Alabama, my mom called and said, "You won't believe what I found." The baby's Easter shoes were in the pocket of one of my jackets. I didn't know what to say. Eventually, my father gave the house to my younger sister, and she moved in. She never had any issues with the house, and neither did her kids. But when my daughter was 7, we let her stay with my sister for the summer. I went to pick her up, and as soon as I stepped inside the house for the first time in years, I heard a booming voice say, "Welcome home." I froze. My sister invited me to sit down, but I immediately told her, "No, let's go outside." I couldn't stay. It wasn't the same house I grew up in. It was December 2004 when this all went down at my sister Kelly's apartment in Pine Lake, Texas. Our family had always been a magnet for strange occurrences, but Kelly and I seemed to have a bit more of an affinity for the unexplained than most. At the time, Kelly had been living alone for about a month after a messy breakup. Feeling lonely, she invited me and my girlfriend, Tamra, to come over and hang out. Kelly had already shared some of the bizarre things that had been happening in her apartment. One afternoon, she came home from work, just like any other day. She set her purse and coat on the kitchen counter, ran a bath, and relaxed for a bit. But when she came back to the kitchen, she found her purse sitting upright in the middle of the floor. Nothing had spilled out, and it wasn't knocked over. It was as if it had been placed there intentionally. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened either. Random objects, bowls, glasses, would end up on the floor in strange, deliberate ways. That afternoon, we hung out in the yard, chatting, smoking, and playing a few rounds of Dance Dance Revolution. Eventually, the conversation turned to the eerie happenings in the apartment. Tamra was pretty nervous about it, but we managed to get her more curious than scared. We decided to turn off all the lights and try to coax something out. For half an hour, we asked questions, calling out, daring it to make its presence known, but nothing happened. Disappointed, we flicked the lights back on and came up with a new plan. We took a tube of Kelly's chapstick, carefully placed it on the kitchen floor, and measured to make sure it was exactly an inch away from the grout lines in every direction. We told whatever was there, "If you like moving things around, move the chapstick." Then we left it there and waited in the living room. But as time passed, nothing happened. Eventually, We picked it up and set it back on the counter. As we relaxed, I mentioned an old, creepy house not far from Kelly's place. The house had a screened-in porch and 2 large lion statues on pedestals. A friend of mine had a key to the place because she sometimes helped the realtor with open houses. She told me that 6 people had died in that house since it was built. Curious, we decided to look it up online to see if we could find any more details about its history. Since I didn't know the exact address, our search didn't yield much. I suggested we just drive by. It was only about 10 minutes away. Before we left, we placed the chapstick back on the counter. We were gone for about 30 minutes. When we returned, we went straight to Kelly's room to continue our search online. As I walked through the kitchen, I glanced over at the chapstick. It was still sitting on the counter, just as we had left it. Everything seemed normal. A few minutes later, Tamara offered to grab some drinks and walked into the hallway. Barely 2 seconds after she left, we heard her scream, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" She ran back into the room, her eyes wide and her face pale. We jumped up in panic, asking, "What happened? What is it?" She was so scared, she could hardly get the words out but managed to say, "Go look." Kelly and I carefully made our way to the kitchen, peeking around the corner. There, lying on the floor in the exact same spot where we had placed it earlier, was the chapstick. It was positioned with the same careful measurements we had made. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. At first, I thought Tamara was playing some kind of prank, but there was no way. She had just walked out of the room, and it would have taken her at least 10 to 15 seconds to place it so precisely. That was when I knew Kelly hadn't been exaggerating about the ghost in her apartment. Whatever it was making sure we knew it was there. This happened in the summer of 2010 at my mom's house in Pine Lake, a small, quiet town tucked away just outside the city. My mom and her boyfriend had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving me home alone. I invited my friend Mike over to hang out, play games, and mess around with our guitars. We were in for a laid-back night of music and fun. We ordered pizza, played video games, and got totally hooked on a new game I just bought, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. As we played, strange noises started to interrupt our fun, banging, clanking, and the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. At first, we thought it was just part of the game, some hidden sound effects, but they kept coming. To be honest, we weren't entirely sober, but we weren't wasted either, just feeling good, typical teens trying to get away with a little bit of reckless fun. But after a while, the noises became harder to ignore. I muted the TV and waited in silence. Sure enough, we heard it again. "It's probably the fridge," I said, trying to reassure myself. But then a loud bang made us both jump. We froze, staring at the laundry room door that led to the garage. Something wasn't right. I decided to check it out, so I paused the game again and crept quietly into the kitchen. The noises continued, quieter now, but still unsettling. My first thought was to call the police, but I hesitated. Explaining why 2 minors, smelling like beer, needed help didn't seem like a good idea. Then, another loud bang came from the garage. Something was definitely moving around in there. I dialed 911. "There's someone in my garage making a lot of noise," I told the dispatcher. Minutes later, 3 officers arrived. They didn't ask about the beer, thankfully, and searched the entire house, including the garage, but found nothing. "Probably a raccoon," one of them said. That explanation didn't sit right with me. If it was a raccoon, it must have been the size of a bear the way those noises sounded. After they left, Mike and I went back to the game, trying to salvage what was left of the night. But it didn't last long. About 30 minutes later, the noises came back, louder and more aggressive. I called the cops again, and this time, 5 officers showed up. They conducted a more thorough search, even checking the attic, but found nothing. "Call us if it happens again," they said before they left. By now, it was nearing midnight. An hour passed, and I started to think the night was finally over, but then the noises came back. This time, I didn't even think twice. I called the police for the 3rd time. They showed up with 8 officers and a helicopter, which hovered over the house with a spotlight. It was humiliating. Our neighbors woke up to the noise, but once again, they found nothing. After that, I figured I'd caused enough trouble. No more calls. Mike and I decided to handle it ourselves. Armed with baseball bats, we approached the garage door. As we got closer, the banging grew louder and faster, like something was racing toward the door. Panicked, we grabbed our shoes and ran out of the house. We didn't stop until we were halfway down the block. When I turned around, I saw a man standing in the yard. He was dressed in old mechanic clothes, like something out of the 50s, and he just stared at us as we ran. That's when I knew this wasn't some prank or someone hiding in the garage. We headed to our friend Alex's house. His parents didn't mind if people dropped by late, so we figured it was the safest place to go. But Alex, who had taken a few hits of acid earlier, was outside. Imagine his reaction, tripping in the dark, only to see 2 guys running at him with bats and shoes. We scared the life out of them. After we explained everything, Alex insisted on going back to my house to take care of it. We tried to stop him, but he was set on going. When I asked, "What if he kills you first?" Alex just shrugged and said, "Then I'll come back and kill him." We let him go. About 45 minutes later, Alex still hadn't returned, and we started to worry. Reluctantly, Mike and I went back to the house. Peering through the windows, we didn't see anything. On the count of 3, we burst through the front door, ready for whatever waited inside. Instead of danger, we found Alex sitting on the couch, eating our leftover pizza, drinking a mixed drink, and playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. I wanted to strangle him. After everything, I never saw the mechanic-looking man again, and the strange noises didn't return. Alex was defriended for a week, but eventually, I let it go. Some things you just can't explain. This happened when I was staying at my mom's boyfriend's house in Silver Springs, a quiet town not far from the desert. It was a warm summer evening, and I was lying on the couch in the living room, talking to my girlfriend on the phone. The living room led into the kitchen through a small, unused dining area, just a few empty feet between the 2 spaces, with 2 bar stools at the counter. As I sat there, chatting and staring blankly at the wall in front of me, I saw something shift out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, something shaped like a person, moved swiftly from right to left. It was enough to make my heart race, and I whipped around to find nothing. The front and back doors were locked, and the only other person in the house was my sister, Kelly. She was in the master bedroom, talking to her boyfriend who was out of town. I got up and went straight to her room, asking if she had just come out. She was still lying on her bed, phone to her ear, swearing she hadn't moved. It was odd, but I brushed it off, convincing myself that I must have imagined it. I returned to the living room, finished my call, and turned off the lights in the front of the house before heading back to Kelly's room to hang out. A while later, Kelly looked at me, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" she asked. It was hard to ignore the strange noises, the sound of a phone being picked up and hung up repeatedly from somewhere else in the house. She told her boyfriend she'd call him back and tried to check the line, but every time she tried to dial out, random numbers would press themselves, like someone was messing with the phone from the other side. We couldn't dial out at all. Both of us were without cell phones, and the atmosphere in the room turned tense. We locked the bedroom door and discussed what to do. Staying in the room didn't feel right anymore, so we decided on a plan B. I would sneak out of the room, check the hallway, and look around the corner toward the other phone in the house. We found an old metal pipe from a vacuum cleaner to use for protection. Kelly slowly unlocked the bedroom door, and I crept into the dark hallway, stopping every few feet to listen. The house was eerily quiet, with nothing unusual at first, but as I reached the end of the hallway and peeked around the corner, I was met with the empty family room and the front door. I felt a little braver, but then I heard it. It sounded like hundreds of water drops hitting the carpet. The noise was coming from the direction of the phone. I turned my head slowly, and that's when I saw it. A shadowy figure standing next to the phone. its hand reaching out toward me. My heart slammed into my chest, and I ran back to Kelly's room, slamming and locking the door behind me. Both of us were terrified, eyes wide with fear. We tried calling the police, but the line kept cutting out with static, the interference getting worse. After several tries, we finally managed to get through. The police arrived quickly, and we met them at the front door, rushing out in a panic. They searched the house with us, and when we reached the family room, we saw that the back Arcadia door was cracked open about 5 inches. I was certain it had been locked before. The officers stayed with us while we packed a bag to leave for the night, and we didn't come back until my mom and her boyfriend returned. But that wasn't the only strange experience we had in that house. A few nights later, we called the police 3 times because of the same strange noises. The third time, they even brought a helicopter to search the area, but found nothing. One night, Dustin and I were outside after hearing loud bangs, and we ran down the street with baseball bats, thinking someone might be messing with us. When I turned around, I saw a man standing in the yard, just staring at us from the dark. It was like he'd been watching us the entire time. My mom even caught something on camera once. It was clear as day, an apparition in the window. You could see its cheekbones, glasses, and a goatee, the top half of its body hovering in the air. That house. There was no shortage of creepy events, and to this day, I can't shake the feeling that something was never quite right there. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Back in 2007, I moved into an old house in Pine Lake, a quiet town nestled between forests and rolling hills in the Midwest. It wasn't a place I'd originally intended to settle, but something about it felt right. After a few months, I decided to visit the local cemetery to pay respects to my aunt, who had passed a few years earlier. It wasn't something I did regularly, but that day, something pulled me there. Little did I know, that visit would mark the beginning of something far darker than I could have imagined. At that time, I was living with my girlfriend, Whitney, and my best friend, David, who was renting the second bedroom. We were all just trying to live simple lives, not expecting any disturbances. But after I returned from the cemetery, strange things started happening. It began small, just the faint sound of footsteps from David's room, while both of us were downstairs. We both heard it at the same time, and there was no denying it. It wasn't natural. Whitney started to feel uneasy too, noticing odd noises and a sense of dread that seemed to hang in the air. One morning around 5:30 a.m., she called me at work, her voice trembling. She had gone to her parents' house in the middle of the night because she heard someone walking just outside our bedroom door. She didn't want to wake David, but she couldn't shake the fear that something was wrong. I tried to brush it off, but deep down, I knew she wasn't imagining it. A week later, I woke up early one weekend, and once again, I heard footsteps, but this time, they were in the room with me. I followed the faint sound, creeping along the carpet as it moved out of the room. I wasn't terrified, but I didn't want to worry Whitney. I couldn't wait to tell David, though. Months later, David moved out, and my brother, his wife, and their young son moved in. The strange occurrences didn't stop. They only grew worse. There were loud bangs echoing through the house, especially upstairs, where the rooms felt colder, like something was watching. One night, my brother was working late, and my sister-in-law, and I decided to test if the entity in the house could interact with us. I placed a rubber ball on the first step of the staircase, making sure it was snug against the next step. We left the house, told whatever was there to move the ball if it could, and forgot about it. About 10 minutes later, when we returned, we heard a loud thud. The ball had fallen off the step and rolled 2 feet onto the landing. There was no logical explanation for it. The ball was solid rubber, heavy enough to stay put, and it was positioned in such a way that it couldn't have just rolled by itself. That was when I knew this wasn't just my imagination. We began experimenting with EVP recordings. One night, my little brother set up a recorder in the house while we were all out. It ran for over 2 hours. When we returned, we uploaded the audio to my computer. 13 distinct sounds were captured. The first was the most chilling. A deep, loud exhale directly into the microphone, as though someone had breathed right into it. The others were eerie bangs coming from the empty room where the recorder had been placed. My brother and his family eventually moved out. They couldn't stand the constant terror anymore. When I was alone in the house, the activity intensified. One night, while I was chatting with friends on my computer, a loud bang shook the entire house, so violently that the chandelier above me swayed. It sounded like a bowling ball had been dropped right above me. I froze in my seat, heart racing, when I heard a doorknob upstairs rattle. That was it for me. I grabbed my keys and left for the casino to wait out the night. The scariest event came just before I moved out. I just returned home and set my sunglasses down on my closed laptop. I went upstairs to check the rooms before the landlord's inspection. Halfway up the stairs, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease and decided I didn't want to go up alone. I called for my cat, trying to coax him to follow. That's when I saw it. My sunglasses suddenly flew off the laptop and hit the wall 5 feet away. They didn't fall. They flew across the room. Despite the fear gnawing at me, I forced myself to finish the inspection. Upstairs, the air felt thick and cold, the temperature dropping sharply. I quickly checked the bathroom and bedroom, but then a wave of exhaustion hit me, and I collapsed onto the bed, thinking I would rest for just a minute. I woke hours later, the room dark and silent. A loud pop from the floor jolted me awake, and I turned to see my cat staring, wide-eyed, behind me. I glanced at the mirror and caught a glimpse of something. An almost glowing figure, tall and faint, standing just behind me. It vanished quickly, but a wave of energy surged through me. My body stiffened, and I let out a grunt before everything went black. When I came to, it was the next afternoon, and I was downstairs, with no memory of how I got there. I remembered the figure, the pain, the intense energy, but the rest was a blur. From that day forward, things changed. I began having precognitive thoughts, flashes of insight, a sense of knowing things before they happened. It wasn't visions, but rather a strange clarity, as if I was reading the events as they unfolded. I tested this ability over time. One night, while waiting at a drive-thru, I guessed the make and color of the next car to pull up behind me, and the next one after that. I was right both times. I also tried using Zener cards online and scored as high as 48 out of 50 when I was in the right mindset. The hardest part was figuring out which thoughts were trustworthy. Once I had a strong sense that my son would be stung by a scorpion. Just an hour later, it happened. Scorpions aren't normally active during the day, especially not indoors, but it happened. Since then, I've kept a journal of these experiences, trying to understand this gift or curse. I'm still not sure how much of it ties back to the house in Pine Lake, but I can't help but wonder, was there something in that house that awakened this ability in me? What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? About 3 years ago, my best friend Emily called me one night in October and asked me to come over to her grandparents' old house. It was only a few blocks from my place, so I decided to walk over. When I arrived, we sat out on the porch, sipping beers and chatting. A little later, her older sister Sarah joined us and began telling me about a seance they had conducted with their cousin at his trailer. They were still shaken from that night, and the way they described it made my skin crawl. Sarah pulled out her phone and played recordings they had made right after the seance. There were a few clips, and hearing them still sends chills down my spine. Emily explained that after the seance, their cousin Jesse had called her, completely panicked, crying, and begging for help. He told her, "Emily, help me. He's not leaving me alone. He's right next to me. I can't see him, but I can feel him." While Jesse was losing it, Emily could hear a deep, growling, demonic voice in the background, something Jesse couldn't hear. One of the recordings was especially disturbing. You could hear Emily shout, "Leave him alone, get away from him." And then, in a deep, guttural voice, something responded, "Nu-oo-oo-oo-oo-ho." Meanwhile, Jessie was still crying and pleading in the background. It was chilling. Listening to it left me frozen. When people heard about it later, they didn't believe them. They insisted the recording had to be fake, but I knew it was real. There was no way they could have faked something like that. A few days later, Emily invited me over to watch a new paranormal show called Paranormal Lab. While we were watching, we both started feeling uneasy for no apparent reason. We couldn't explain it, but it got so bad that we decided to move to her bedroom, close the door, and watch the show there. At some point, she got a call from a friend and went outside to meet them. I stayed behind but felt so uncomfortable alone that I decided to wait in the living room instead. That's when Emily started yelling from outside, "Hey, that's not funny. Open the door. Why did you lock it?" I was confused and shouted back, "I haven't touched the door." I went to check, and sure enough, the latch on the door was fully turned and locked. The thing is, that lock could only be set from inside the house, and I was the only one inside at the time. After I unlocked it, we both heard strange noises coming from the roof. It sounded like something, or someone, was up there. We were too scared to go back inside, so we stayed outside until her friend arrived. About a week later, the movie Paranormal Activity came out in theaters, and Emily thought it would be fun to go see it. After the movie, we ended up at her cousin's trailer. Emily wanted to do another seance, and even though I didn't want anything to do with it, she and her cousin went ahead with it. We all sat around the kitchen table, Emily, her two cousins, and me, while her sister stayed in the living room with her kids. Emily and her cousin lit a candle and turned off the lights. I started praying silently, already regretting being there. As her cousin recited whatever he was saying, the candle began to dim. It grew fainter and fainter before suddenly flaring back up. My heart was racing. When they finally finished and turned the lights back on, everything fell apart. Both Emily and her cousin jumped up, crying hysterically, and ran around the room shouting, "Get away from me! Leave us alone!" Her cousin insisted they needed to read the closing lines to finish the seance, but Emily was too distraught to cooperate. She cried uncontrollably, while her cousin managed to recite the lines on his own and eventually calmed down. Emily, however, couldn't stop crying. Her sister tried to comfort her, and I grabbed a bottle of holy water from the house and sprinkled it around her and on her. It took a while, but she finally settled down. I went home that night feeling completely shaken. I couldn't stop praying, and I didn't sleep well for days. Emily told me later that she continued to see things afterward, but thankfully, she's doing much better now. That night is something I'll never forget. It was terrifying, and I hope I never experience anything like it again. I grew up in a small town nestled deep in the Arizona desert, just a short drive west of Phoenix. It was a quiet farming community, barely more than 1,500 residents, where everyone knew each other by name. My father, a retired military man, volunteered as a deputy with the local sheriff's department, patrolling the sleepy roads once or twice a week. On those nights, my mother and I often stayed at my grandmother's house just outside town. She was elderly, and living alone in a small, weathered cottage meant we didn't want her to be alone when night fell. My grandmother's house was modest, no bigger than 600 square feet, with a small yard surrounded by a low iron fence, the kind you might find in any forgotten corner of the desert. To get to the front door, you would walk up a dirt path, past the sagging fence, and make your way up to a porch, where the old wooden door creaked as you approached. The walkway was open to the street, a quiet dirt road that stretched out in the emptiness of the desert. One night, while my father was out on patrol, my mother and I stayed at my grandmother's house, sleeping in the small front room, just like we always did. Around 2 or 3 a.m., a loud knock echoed through the stillness of the house. My grandmother, always a light sleeper, had been awake, but my mother was sound asleep on the couch. The knock was sudden and sharp, waking my mother, and both she and my grandmother immediately assumed it was my father returning from his shift early. It wasn't uncommon for him to come back ahead of schedule, though it was a bit earlier than expected. This was a tiny, quiet town, and crime wasn't something you thought much about. When they heard the knock, my grandmother, without hesitation, went straight for the door while my mother gathered our things to head back home. But when the door opened, it wasn't my father standing there. A woman stood in the frame, her pale hair glowing in the moonlight, her eyes an unnaturally bright green, like two emeralds set in her face. She wore a long fur coat the same color as her hair, draped loosely around her shoulders. My mother, standing just behind my grandmother, confirmed every detail, frozen in confusion. My grandmother asked, "Can I help you?" The woman's voice was soft, but there was an odd edge to it when she answered, "Can I come sit by your fire?" Something about the woman's presence made my grandmother uneasy. She was never one to shy away from anyone, but something about the woman made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Without a second thought, my grandmother snapped, "Hell no," and slammed the door in the woman's face. Afterward, my grandmother couldn't explain why she reacted so sharply, but it felt like instinct. Almost immediately, she regretted it, and as if compelled, she swung open the door to apologize. My mother rushed to the window next to the door to get another look at the woman, but in that brief moment, the woman was gone. She wasn't standing in the yard. She wasn't in sight anywhere. My grandmother and mother stepped outside, scanning the street, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. There were no signs of her, no trace, not even a whisper in the wind. They stayed awake for the next couple of hours, waiting for my father to come home, both of them shaken, unable to explain what had just happened. When my father returned, he was just as unsettled, having seen nothing unusual during his patrol. The next morning, my grandmother and mother asked the neighbors if anyone had heard or seen anything strange, or if anyone had knocked on their doors in the middle of the night. But nobody had. My grandmother had lived in that neighborhood for decades and knew everyone, their families, their histories. Yet neither she nor my mother recognized the woman who had come knocking. Adding to the mystery, my grandmother's house was a mile from the highway, with other houses, gas stations, and businesses in between. If this woman had been lost, it seemed almost impossible that she end up at my grandmother's house, especially at that hour. And even if she had, how did she disappear so quickly? The yard was fenced, the gate was latched, and there was no way she could have left the property and vanished from sight in the time it took for my grandmother to reopen the door. I don't know who or what that woman was. I don't know what she wanted, beyond asking to sit by a fire that didn't exist. My grandmother didn't even have a fireplace. But I know this really happened. My family still remembers that night, and no one can explain it. It's a mystery we still carry with us, and something about it still lingers in the back of my mind, leaving me with more questions than answers. My grandmother's house in Pine Lake, Arizona, has been in our family for over 50 years. It was where she raised my father and his 3 brothers, and I spent countless weekends there when I was growing up. As a kid, the house always felt warm and welcoming, but as I got older, I started noticing things I couldn't explain. There's this long, narrow hallway in the house that has always made me uneasy. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of dark figures standing at the end of it, staring at me. It scared me so much that I would run to my grandmother and tell her, but she would laugh it off, telling me I was just imagining things or that scary movies had gotten into my head. One night when I was about 9, my grandmother and I were up late watching TV in the living room. She went to the bathroom, leaving me alone. As I sat there, I felt an intense, overwhelming sense of dread, like someone was watching me from the shadows. I tried not to look down the hallway, knowing it would only make things worse. I focused on the TV screen, but then I heard it, deep, heavy breathing right by my ear. I could feel the warmth of it on the back of my neck. I leaped up and spun around, but no one was there. My heart raced, and I screamed, causing my grandmother to rush back into the room. I was crying and trembling, and when I told her what had happened, she simply shrugged it off. She said it was all in my head, but I couldn't shake the fear. After that night, I refused to stay over at her house. For years, I continued to visit her during the day, but as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, I would have my dad come pick me up. When he asked why I didn't want to stay, I kept quiet, afraid he wouldn't believe me. My grandmother already thought I was being foolish, and I didn't want my dad to think the same. When I turned 15, one of my uncles passed away unexpectedly. My grandmother was devastated and didn't want to be alone, so she asked me to stay the weekend with her. I wanted to be there for her, but the thought of spending the night in that house terrified me. When my dad noticed I was hesitant, I finally told him about the strange things I had seen and felt in the house. I braced myself for him to dismiss it, but instead, he shared his own stories. My dad admitted that he and his brothers had seen the same dark figure many times. He told me about one night when he was lying in bed, and his bedroom door creaked open. A shadowy figure stood in the doorway, just staring at him. He screamed for his brother, who woke up and shouted at the figure to leave. It vanished before their eyes. My dad said this happened often when they were growing up. He also shared a night when they heard my grandmother scream from her bedroom. Rushing to check on her, they found the same dark figure standing in her doorway. As soon as it saw them, it bolted down the hallway, heading for the back door. They chased it outside, but it disappeared into the night. My dad believed it wasn't an evil spirit because it never harmed anyone. He thought it might be a lost soul, wandering the house without a purpose. He told me my grandmother had seen the figure too, but she refused to believe her house was haunted. She always insisted it was nothing. That night, I decided to stay at my grandmother's house. Nothing happened. Little by little, I started staying over more often. I still felt like I was being watched and sometimes caught a glimpse of the dark figure out of the corner of my eye. But I reminded myself of what my dad had said. It was just a lost soul, and it wouldn't harm me, and it never did. Now I'm 26 and live in Flagstaff, so I don't get to visit my grandmother as much as I'd like. When I do, I don't stay the night, especially now that I have 2 kids of my own. I don't want them to experience the same fear I felt growing up. The house will always hold memories for me, both beautiful and unsettling. But I still love visiting my grandmother whenever I can. It was another graveyard shift at Maggie's Place, the small diner on the edge of Pine Lake, a quiet town tucked away in the middle of nowhere. By this point, I had gotten used to the odd little noises, the creaks of the floor, the soft taps of something against the window in the wind, that accompanied the long, lonely nights. But tonight, something felt off, like a cold whisper brushing the back of my neck, lingering and unnerving. I was fighting the usual fatigue, so I went through my usual routine: coffee, water, energy drinks, and frequent trips to the restroom. During one of those trips, as I washed my hands, a strange thought popped into my mind. Something's going to happen. I just know it. You need to hurry up. I chuckled to myself, brushing it off. But as I walked back to the counter, the feeling wouldn't shake off. It was like the air itself was holding its breath. My phone rang, and as I glanced at it, I saw my coworker, Mike, getting up from his station. He stretched and wandered off towards the restroom, then out onto the balcony to take a break. I didn't think much of it at first, but then, a few minutes later, I felt the sudden urge to use the restroom again. I decided to wait until he came back, but when I finally stood up and walked down the darkened hallway toward the restroom, I immediately noticed something strange. The carpet beneath my flip-flops felt softer, almost damp. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead seemed to dim the further I walked. The air around me felt heavy, thick, like something was pressing down. I shook it off and pushed open the restroom door. What greeted me wasn't what I expected. A loud rushing noise filled the small room. I froze, thinking it was just a broken fan, but there were no fans in the restroom. The sound was unnerving. I stepped cautiously toward the men's side of the restroom, my heart quickening as the noise grew louder. I was startled to find the white tile floor flooded, water creeping up the walls, pooling across the floor like something alive. What the hell? I muttered to myself. Between the men's and women's restrooms was a small locker room with a shower, a relic from when the building had once housed a gym. The sound was coming from there. My pulse quickened, and I hesitated for a moment. What if something, or someone, was in there, but I couldn't just ignore it. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of light spilling in from the hallway. I flicked on the switch and froze. The shower was on full blast, spraying hot water all over the room and flooding the floor. The shower curtain was pulled back, the water running unchecked, splashing against the walls and soaking the floor. "What the hell?" I repeated, this time in a louder, more panicked voice. I ran back to the counter where Mike was, calling for him to come quickly. He jogged over confused. "What's going on?" I pointed toward the bathroom. "The floor's flooded. Something's happening back there." He raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Did you leave the shower on?" "No," I snapped. "I've been here the whole time." We both walked back to the restroom. Mike's eyes widened when he saw the mess. "Did you take a shower or something?" "Of course not," I replied. "Check the building. No one else is supposed to be in here." We checked every corner of the building, even the parking lot, but we were alone. The office was supposed to be locked down tight after hours. There was no one else in sight. Opening the men's restroom door, we saw that the water had spread into that room as well. "We need to call the boss," Mike said. "Otherwise, they'll think we did this." I shook my head, still in disbelief. I was just in here. There was nothing wrong. We turned off the water in the shower. The lever was stiff, requiring force to push down. Whoever had turned it on must have pushed it with a lot of strength. Mike swore he hadn't touched it. I asked him again, "Are you messing with me?" He swore up and down that he wasn't. We scoured the building, checking rooms, even the locked janitor's closet, which was never locked during the night. There were wet floor signs and towels we found to try to clean up the mess, but nothing made sense. Later, during my break, I decided to walk around the building alone. It was around 3 a.m., and the silence of the diner was oppressive. As I wandered down the hallway, I found myself speaking aloud. "Hello!" I called out with a strange, almost playful tone. "Did you do that? The shower thing? Pretty impressive. Funny, really. Hello?" There was no reply, just the eerie quiet, but I couldn't help it. I felt like laughing. I'd always had a sense of something watching me, something lingering just beyond the corner of my eye. It was like a playful female spirit, someone who was always around but never fully revealed. I had seen a shadowy figure a couple of times, only for a brief moment, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was always there, just out of reach. By 4 a.m., the morning shift was starting to trickle in. Mike and I didn't say anything to them. We returned quietly to our stations, trying to go back to normal as the first calls began coming in. At 6 a.m., the janitor arrived. He noticed the wet floor immediately and started walking around, inspecting it. He seemed puzzled, but didn't ask us anything. I wanted to tell him about what happened, but he didn't believe in anything paranormal. Later, I heard he had called a plumbing company, claiming leaky pipes caused the flooding. But I knew better. I knew it wasn't the pipes. The strange events of that night stuck with me long after. I only told a few other night shift coworkers about it. But every time something odd happens, when the air feels thick or the lights flicker, I can't help but think about that night and wonder if the spirit I felt had something to do with it. What do you think happened that night? Have you ever felt like something was there, but you just couldn't explain it? When my wife and I moved into our first home in a small town called Pine Lake about 2.5 years ago, I wasn't entirely convinced. She was in love with the place, and the area was peaceful, so we decided to go ahead and buy it. Over time, it grew on me, but there have been a few strange events I just can't explain. The first incident happened about 6 months after we moved in. We had just finished dinner, and I was lying on the sofa watching TV, while my wife tidied up in the kitchen, which shares an open space with the living room. As she was about to start washing dishes, the kitchen sink suddenly turned on full blast. She was still a few steps away from it. She screamed and ran over to me, visibly shaken. I asked what was wrong, and she said, "The sink just turned on by itself." I went over, turned it off, and immediately felt a strange tingling sensation all over my body. I brushed it off at the time, thinking it was just the nerves from the weird situation. But after looking at how our faucet works, I realized it's the kind where you have to lift the handle firmly to turn it on. Even with high water pressure, it shouldn't have been able to turn on by itself. Another recurring incident involved an electronic picture frame in our living room. It would randomly turn on, displaying a slideshow of pictures. This happened at least a dozen times, though we never saw it power up. We just find it on when entering the room. My wife eventually unplugged it. Recently, my wife came home from work and asked why the garage door was open. I hadn't been in the garage all day and hadn't even heard it open. We don't park our car there. It's mostly used for storage. To stop it from happening again, I locked the door so it couldn't be opened remotely. When we first moved in, there was a bedroom with badly stained carpet and a strange odor. We figured it was just from a child's messy room, but there was something more unsettling about it, something almost like the smell of decay. While painting shortly after moving in, I found a syringe hidden on top of the kitchen cabinets. It struck me as odd but didn't seem out of place given the room's condition. Over time, I noticed that this bedroom seemed to be the center of the strange occurrences. One night stands out more than the rest. My wife was out with friends, and I was home alone, sitting at the kitchen table. The TV was on, the lights were dimmed, and my laptop was open, just trying to distract myself. Suddenly, I felt a presence coming from the direction of that bedroom. It was like static electricity, slowly moving toward me, then circling me. I didn't see anything, but I could feel it, especially on my left side where it finally stopped. Frozen in place, I nervously said, "Okay, I acknowledge your presence. So now what?" The sensation lingered for another minute. Just as it began to fade, there was a loud banging on the window directly behind me. I jumped up and pulled the blinds aside, but there was nothing outside. This wasn't a window someone could easily reach. It's in our backyard, surrounded by a brick wall. To get to it, someone would have to climb the wall, knock on the window, and jump back in seconds. It seemed impossible, and there were no trees or branches that could have caused the repeated knocking sound. Given the strange sensation I just experienced, I couldn't shake the feeling that something paranormal was at play. What disturbed me most was the sense that it was toying with me. That window, by the way, is right next to the kitchen sink that turned on by itself. I've tried to research the history of our house, but haven't found anything out of the ordinary. It was only 3 years old when we bought it, and the previous owners lived there for about a year before it sat vacant for another year and a half. There's no record of anyone dying here, though I've wondered if something tragic happened while the house was empty. Maybe someone broke in and overdosed? It's just a theory. One more thing I've noticed. There's a storage shed near that window and a strange spot tucked up against the brick wall. The nook behind it isn't easily accessible. One day, I noticed white markings on the shed's roof, and I climbed up to investigate. Written in white spray paint was the name Luce in cursive, with a heart dotting the I. I have no idea who Luce is. There's no record of anyone with that name living here, and the mystery of it remains unsolved. More recently, we got a small dog, and he sometimes barks at nothing, especially at the Arcadia door at night. There are areas of the house he avoids or enters reluctantly, and while I can't be sure it's related, it's noticeable. Despite all of this, the activity is sporadic and doesn't feel threatening. I'm not afraid of my home. It feels peaceful overall. But every now and then, something happens that reminds me there might be more here than meets the eye. It was when I was about 14 that my family took a trip to visit my grandparents in a small town in Arizona. My mom, always the one to combine history with our vacations, had planned a stop at a ghost town and an old mining site known as Vulture City, located deep in the desert. It was a place with a rich, eerie past, and before long, the heavy, unsettling energy of the place began to make itself felt. The day started off like any other, with us arriving at Vulture City around 9 a.m. My brothers and I immediately set off to explore the town's attractions, beginning with the original mine shaft. But as we approached it, something strange washed over me. Walking toward the shaft felt like walking through thick mud, as if the air itself had become dense and heavy. My legs felt sluggish, and I couldn't tell whether I was being pulled toward the mine or if I should run the other way. My younger brother seemed to sense it too, and we quickly decided to leave the area and head toward the Glory Hole instead. The Glory Hole had a tragic history. Stealing gold from the mines was punishable by hanging, but some miners decided to risk sneaking in at night, chipping away at the pillars that held the mine up to gather the precious ore. One fateful night, the entire structure collapsed, burying 9 miners and 11 mules. None of their bodies were ever recovered. As Cian and I stood at the edge of the collapsed mine, I turned to speak to him, but his face had gone pale. His eyes were wide, and he pointed behind me. I turned around quickly, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something pale and fleeting, before it vanished without a trace. It wasn't fog, it wasn't mist. This was the clear Arizona desert in broad daylight. Whatever it was, it definitely wasn't natural. We both hurried away from the site, unsure of what we had seen but relieved to be moving on. The most unsettling part of the visit came when we walked toward the old hanging tree near the sheriff's office. The legend goes that 18 men were hanged there for various crimes, though some say it may have been fewer. As my brother Aaron and I stood under the tree, something strange happened. Aaron suddenly clutched his chest and started coughing uncontrollably, gasping for air. He told me he couldn't breathe and that there was an unbearable weight pressing down on him. I quickly grabbed him and pulled him away from the tree. Aaron was only 8 years old at the time and had never been the type to exaggerate. Cian and I hadn't said anything about our earlier experiences, and Aaron hadn't known about the tree's dark history. His reaction felt too real, too genuine, to be anything but unsettling. We told our mom what happened, but she brushed it off, insisting we continue exploring. At that point, the 3 of us just wanted to leave, but we reluctantly followed her as she urged us onward. Our final stop was a place where ore had been ground for refining. The old machinery, rusted tools, and conveyor belts were scattered around the area. The roof of the building was only about 9 feet high, and the whole place felt like something from another time. As we wandered through the shed, I heard a faint creaking sound above us. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was just the wind, but then I realized it wasn't the wind at all. A board up on the roof was moving in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Swing, stop, as if something was moving it with intention. Cian looked up at the same time I did, and we both froze as the board suddenly wrenched free. It floated for a split second, then slammed to the ground with a force that made my heart jump. Cian barely managed to jump out of the way in time. We exchanged looks of disbelief, but we didn't say a word to our mom. We knew she wouldn't believe us. As we lingered near a conveyor belt, I felt a strange tug on my jacket. I thought it was Aaron messing around, but when I turned, he was looking at me from across the room, confused. "What you say?" he asked. No one was near me. No one could have tugged on my jacket. And then, it happened again. 2 sharp pulls, like a child trying to get my attention. My heart raced as I looked down and saw my jacket being pulled by something invisible, as though a hand was gripping it. It tugged again. That was enough for me. I screamed, bolted out of the shed, and refused to go back inside. A week later, when we were back in Florida, I stumbled upon an article in Arizona Highways that detailed a paranormal investigation at Vulture City. It mentioned that similar phenomena had been experienced by other visitors at the very same machine shed. The article described a young boy who had died there decades ago, his head severed by a conveyor belt. It was said that his spirit haunted the area, seeking attention or companionship. I was taken aback when I realized that I had read that same article before our trip, but it hadn't stayed in my memory, not until after we returned. It was like that knowledge had been buried in my mind, waiting to resurface. Now, I can't help but wonder if I should have tried to reach out to the boy, if maybe he was just looking for someone to notice him. At the time, Cian and I had been at odds, and I wonder if the spirit had been drawn to me for that reason. Either way, that day at Vulture City has stayed with me, leaving me with more questions than answers. Even now, just thinking about it gives me chills. The last couple of months have been deeply unsettling. Something strange and malevolent entered our home, and it's turned life upside down for me and my family. At first, the disturbances were subtle, small things that mostly occurred while we were asleep. Sleep paralysis had always seemed like a medical issue to me, tied to stress or lack of sleep. But one night, my husband and I experienced it at the same time. That was when I started to think this wasn't just a physical or psychological problem. I began researching the phenomenon, and that's when I found references to what I believe is an entity known as a shadow, a shape-shifting being that can disguise its presence by manipulating energy. These creatures are rarely benign, and something about it felt wrong. It was searching for something tied to me or my family, maybe even something from a past life. I couldn't figure out its intentions, but its presence was undeniable. One night, the entity struck. I had vivid, horrifying dreams, and when I woke up, I felt the weight of something dark in the room. Though I couldn't see it, I knew it was there, sitting in the corner, watching me. The air felt thick, heavy, charged. Anger rose within me, and I yelled, "You bastard! You're lucky I don't have my camera." It wasn't fear driving me, it was pure, instinctive rage. For the next couple of weeks, the house felt suffocating. My cats, usually confident and curious, began walking low to the ground, eyes wide and ears flattened. My dogs started barking at nothing, acting like they were seeing something I couldn't. Then, as quickly as it had started, the activity stopped, but I knew it hadn't left. It was still there, just hiding. And then everything escalated. It was around 3 a.m. on a Sunday, a cold and foggy morning. My husband was in the living room watching TV while I baked brownies in the kitchen. The whir of the electric mixer drowned out most other noises, but suddenly, a strange, guttural sound broke through. A mixture of a growl and a scream, coming from the dining area that connects the kitchen and living room. My husband, startled, turned to me and asked if I had killed a dinosaur. I quickly told him it was probably the TV, but he reminded me that he had paused it so I wouldn't miss anything while I baked. The sound hadn't come from the TV, nor had I made it with the mixer. There were no animals near the dining area, and nothing had fallen. It was unexplainable. Later that morning, around 6 a.m., we went to bed, and that's when the dreams took a darker turn. I dreamt of a woman handing me a small, lifeless baby to embalm for a funeral. The baby, a girl about 9 months old, slowly transformed into a glass doll. Then she handed me another smaller baby, this one turning into a glass cat doll. When I set it down, it became real, a massive cat, with black and gray fur and glowing red eyes. The cat's stare was filled with malice, and I was terrified. I tried to throw it outside, but when I looked out, I saw 3 of my real cats with it. The demon cat smirked, knowing I would try to rescue my pets. I opened the door, and just like that, the demon cat was back inside. In the dream, I ran to my bedroom, but the cat broke down the door, its body impossibly large, and advanced toward me, speaking in a deep, guttural voice. I don't remember its words, but I can still hear its tone in my head. The sound chilled me to my core. Just as it lunged, my dog Loki appeared, attacking the cat, tearing open its stomach. The cat morphed into a grotesque, hairless beast, its sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. Loki killed it, leaving its lifeless body on the floor. The stench it left behind was unbearable. I woke up drenched in sweat, with Loki barking furiously outside my window. The air in my room felt heavy and oppressive, thick with something I couldn't explain. I yelled, "If you don't get the hell out of my house, I swear you will regret it." Somehow, I managed to fall back asleep. When my husband woke me around 2 p.m., he led me to the living room. The scene was chilling. The couches had been moved, the lamp knocked over, the rocking chair toppled, and the coffee table flipped. All the cats were hiding in my office, clearly terrified. Loki was outside, growling at nothing, while Ajax, my other dog, was inexplicably in the front yard, trembling in fear. There was no way Ajax could have gotten out of the yard without someone letting him out, and Loki, always protective, would have attacked anyone who tried to get near him. It didn't make sense. Since that night, the house has felt lighter, as though the entity had left. But I know better. I can feel it, lingering somewhere, perhaps in the yard, searching for a way back inside. I've been doing everything I can to make the space inhospitable, hoping it will move on. But if it doesn't, and if it tries to return, I may have to call on one of my own protective spirits for help. Something I'm hesitant to do, but will consider if it comes to that. For now, I'm cautiously hopeful, but on edge, always watching and waiting for any signs of its return. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Three years ago, I received a phone call that you always fear, the one that changes your life forever. It was just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon when the phone rang. I reached for the handset without hesitation, but just as my fingers grazed it, an unsettling chill ran through me, freezing me for a brief moment. It was as though something deep within me knew what was about to happen. But then, just as quickly, the feeling faded. On the other end was my sister, Laura, delivering the devastating news. Our youngest sister, Jessica, had been admitted to the ICU at a hospital in Los Angeles. The prognosis was grim. She had been there for days, but we hadn't known until that very morning. Jessica, who had struggled with alcoholism for years, had seemingly decided to let go quietly. No fanfare, no goodbyes, just a soft exit with no explanations. She had stopped reaching out to most of us long ago, except for Laura and one other sister, who were now rushing to get to her side. I hung up, my heart heavy, and just as I started to set the phone down, it rang again. This time it was my oldest daughter, Emma, calling unexpectedly from school. She was a high school English teacher, always swamped with work, and never called during the day. She wanted to check in, but after I explained the situation, she didn't hesitate for a second. She offered to drive me to Los Angeles right away. I agreed, and within moments, we were scrambling to make plans. Everything that followed felt like a blur. My youngest, Lily, came home just in time to help pack an overnight bag, while my husband stayed behind, dealing with work and the animals. By 6 o'clock p.m., Emma and her girlfriend Rachel were at the house, ready to drive. Emma, always the responsible one, insisted on driving, while Rachel sat in the front seat. Lily and I settled into the back. The drive from Phoenix to Los Angeles was long but steady. Emma's strict adherence to speed limits made it feel even longer, but I didn't mind. I wanted to arrive safely. We only stopped for gas and bathroom breaks. During one of these stops, I went into the restroom. While washing my hands, I glanced up at the mirror and froze. Staring back at me wasn't just my reflection. My hair, which was always straight, now looked wavy, just like Jessica's, and my chin was sharper, almost identical to hers. Emma walked in just then and saw it too. "Mom, you look just like Aunt Jessica," she said softly. I could only nod, the words stuck in my throat. "Let's go," I muttered. We climbed back into the car and continued our journey, but not long after, we hit a traffic jam. A truck full of building materials had spilled across the freeway, slowing us down for nearly an hour. By the time we were back on track, it was well past 11 o'clock p.m., and the miles seemed to stretch on endlessly. To pass the time, Emma and Rachel played their favorite CDs, but after hours of the same music, I begged for a change. Reluctantly, they agreed, and I began to search for a station. Out in the desert, the radio options were limited, but I finally landed on an oldies station broadcasting out of Los Angeles. As the DJ wrapped up a commercial break, his next words sent a shiver down my spine. And now, here's the #1 song from way back in 1962. The song began, and as it did, Emma whispered, "It's Aunt Jessica." And then the music started, "Sweet Little Jessica." The timing was uncanny. Midnight had just struck, and the song's lyrics seemed to echo Jessica's spirit, Tears welled in our eyes as Emma slowly pulled over to the side of the road. We stepped out into the cool desert night and looked up at the sky. The stars were brighter and closer than I had ever seen them before. The vastness of the universe felt intimately connected in that moment, as if everything was aligned for a reason. A few minutes passed in silence before Emma's phone rang. She answered it, listened for a moment, then simply said, "Yes, we know," before hanging up. Jessica had passed away at 11:41 p.m. on September 7, 2007. Somehow, the song, the stars, and the timing all converged to let us know she was at peace. We resumed our journey, arriving in Los Angeles with a quiet sense of resolution. Jessica was gone, but in that moment on the side of the road, surrounded by family and under the vast, starry sky, she had made her presence known. Rest in peace, my sweet little Jessica. Rest in peace. When my sister was born, and after the incident with the 3 entities that tried to take her, we began sharing a room. I refused to sleep in the other room, not after everything that had happened. Her crib was on the north wall, across from the entrance door on the south side. My bed was positioned on the west wall, near the large closet at the foot. This room would become the place where I had my first encounter with something truly sinister. One night, I woke to the unsettling sound of static coming from the closet. I was just 6 years old, and every inch of me was terrified. The noise grew louder and more erratic, and I didn't know what to do except run across the house to wake my dad. Moving through the house at night always felt like navigating through a crowd that wasn't quite human. Something was off. My dad went to the closet and found that the noise was coming from my old toy microphone. But it made no sense. It didn't have batteries, and it certainly didn't have radio capabilities. He took it away, and I never saw it again. A few days later, while I was playing in that same closet, I heard a loud bang. Boxes fell from the shelves and hit me, giving me a black eye. My parents moved the boxes to the attic, thinking that would fix it. But soon after, books began falling from the shelves. Another black eye. This time, my parents cleared the shelves completely, but the room still didn't feel safe. Despite everything, I kept sleeping there. One night, I dreamt of a strange pink glow coming from the closet. A demon appeared, demanding that I do whatever he said, or he'd hurt me. He told me to kill my kitten. I refused. Suddenly, my dream shifted. I found myself standing alone in a vast, empty desert, lost and confused, only to wake up right back in that room, staring at the demon once again. He laughed and repeated his demands, this time including my mother. Again, I refused, and that's when the fight began, a battle for my soul. Instinctively, I cried out for help, screaming for an angel to save me. I kept screaming until my mom rushed in, waking me from the nightmare. I was drenched in sweat, my body shaking, and I developed a high fever that lasted for days. After that night, I promised myself I would never sleep in that room again. Even though I tried to sleep elsewhere, the house always felt heavy and oppressive, especially at night. I spent one night in the living room, hoping for some peace, but I always felt like I was being watched. One night, I heard someone sit down on the opposite couch and begin to breathe heavily. I froze, pretending not to notice, and somehow managed to fall asleep. In my teenage years, I finally claimed the first room. After setting it up, I left for a few minutes, only to return and find everything on my dresser knocked to the floor, but the items were arranged exactly the same way. As I stared in disbelief, the curtain shade shot up, violently pulling back. I ran out, too terrified to stay. I moved my bed into the closet, plugged in Christmas lights, and left the TV on all night, but the fear never left. One night, at 3 a.m., my stereo blasted at full volume. It stopped when I approached, but as soon as I laid down again, it started up again. Furious, I screamed at it to stop, and just like that, the noise ceased for good. Eventually, I had my sister take room 1, and I went back to room 2. Though I developed insomnia, I felt somewhat safer. After my parents divorced, I moved into the master bedroom. The cold, heavy atmosphere there triggered vivid nightmares. One night, I dreamt that a man trapped me in the shower and stabbed me. When I woke up, I felt pain in my stomach, and there was a red mark. I never knew if it was from the dream or something else. Years later, I moved into a new house, hoping to escape the past. But strange things started happening again. My boyfriend's son saw a boy in his closet, describing him as a 9-year-old who had drowned. One night, we left the dogs in his room while we were out. When we returned, they had chewed through the door to escape and refused to enter the room again. When I investigated, I found a small red imp hiding in the closet. I made it leave, but later I regretted it. It wasn't threatening, just lost, I think. As an adult, I've had my share of encounters. There was the incubus that caused sleep paralysis, and a phantom jogger whose presence felt mocking, like it was toying with me. Despite everything, I've learned to deal with these experiences. I've learned to confront these energies, sometimes even making peace with them. It's been a strange, often frightening journey, but one that has made me stronger over time. In the winter of 1995, my wife, our 2 kids, and I were invited to spend the weekend in a remote cabin in the mountains of Colorado, a quiet town called Pine Ridge. Our friends owned an old rustic cabin tucked deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest highway. It felt like a hidden treasure, far from the noise of everyday life. The cabin was charming, with an undeniable sense of the wilderness woven into every corner. Over the fireplace hung a large elk head, and on another wall was a mounted buck, its eyes staring down at us. The rest of the space was decorated with hunting trophies and rustic furniture, with Native American blankets draped over chairs and the back of the couch. It felt cozy and homey, but there was something off about the decor. When I asked about it, our friends told us they hadn't chosen it. Everything was left the way it was when they found the place, as though it had been untouched for years. Crafted entirely from pine logs, the cabin was small but comfortable, with high ceilings and a large living room. The kitchen was tiny, just enough space for the basics, and the master bedroom was cozy, but the kids were set up in a small room with bunk beds. My wife and I were assigned the loft, a cramped space just under the slanted roof with 2 thin mattresses on foldable frames. It wasn't luxurious, but it would do. That night, after playing a game of Trivial Pursuit with our friends, we all started to drift off around 2 in the morning. Buzzed from wine and tired, my wife and I made our way up to the loft. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it, a strange energy in the air, thick and unnerving. It wasn't threatening, just off. The ceiling was covered in thick cobwebs, and I noticed a few dust motes dancing in the dim light from the lantern hanging on the wall. Our host, noticing how dim the loft was, offered us a candle. I accepted, lit it, and set it by our bed. Lying there, I tried to settle into my book, but the flickering candlelight against the webs above kept me uneasy. I imagined the webs catching fire, so I blew out the candle and tried to sleep. But then, I started hearing it, a soft, mournful whimpering, like someone quietly sobbing. At first, I thought it was my wife, having a bad dream, so I nudged her gently. She grumbled, brushing my hand away. But as the night wore on, the sound didn't stop. It wasn't coming from her. It was faint, but it was clear, a sorrowful, almost melancholic sighing. Hum, hum, hum. I would start to drift off again, only to be jolted awake by the sound, again and again. At times, I thought I heard a soft sigh near me, filling the small space of the loft. My wife, disturbed by my restlessness, occasionally woke up to scold me, thinking I was the one making the noise. At one point, I awoke to a strange, cold light streaming through the small window above us. At first, I thought the sun was coming up, but the light was wrong, too bright, too white, almost piercing. I turned to my wife, only to find her still fast asleep beside me. I was confused, but eventually, I managed to drift back into a restless sleep. The next morning, over coffee, my wife and I shared our experiences. She admitted that she had also seen the strange light, thinking it was morning at first. "Did you hear the crying last night?" I asked. She nodded, telling me she had heard the same sighing, but she tried to ignore it, figuring it was nothing. When we met up with our friends, we told them what had happened. The cabin's owner, a woman named Linda, listened calmly, almost as if she expected it. She then shared a story, one she said had been passed down through the years. A Native American woman named Whitefeather, who had fallen in love with a white man, lived in these very woods. He had built the cabin for her, a secret hideaway where they could meet. But their love was doomed. She wanted more, but he could never leave his family. Heartbroken and desperate, Whitefeather took her own life in the cabin he had built for them. The story sounded like something out of a novel, a tragic romance, but after what we'd experienced that night, it felt more real than fiction. It wasn't just a tale. It was something tangible, something that lingered in the air. The energy in that loft. It wasn't just a story. It was a presence, something that could never be explained. When my family and I moved to Tucson, Arizona, I had just landed a job with a company called Sunshine Arts Incorporated, the kind of quirky, colorful place that promised a world of creativity. Honestly, if they want to come after me for sharing this experience, I'm ready. There's more to their so-called magical world than they'd ever want people to know. Like my mom, I made a big move, bringing my whole family along. We had a 2-year-old daughter, a 1.5-year-old son, a newborn baby, and 3 cats. We rented a single-story home without ever stepping inside, trusting the promises made by Sunshine Arts Incorporated. They needed me to start right away, so by 7:30 in the morning, we were already pulling into Tucson. I asked my wife to drop me off at my new job while she went ahead to check out the house and get things settled. Things didn't exactly start smoothly. My first day at work wasn't exactly the warm welcome I had imagined, but that's an understatement. Around 10:00 a.m., my wife called me, her voice trembling. When she arrived at the house, it was crawling with workers. An inspector from the Arizona Health and Environmental Department had told her that we couldn't move in yet because the place was contaminated with mold and fungus. I told her to take the kids to a hotel for a few days while they got things fixed. Oh, and to sneak the cats in, of course. 2 days later, she called again, relieved, saying, "All clear. We can move in." When I finally saw the house, pulling up with the U-Haul, I felt a cold rush of dread wash over me. The air was heavy, like something oppressive was lingering inside. As I walked through the rooms, I noticed a strange smell, an odd mix of fresh paint trying to cover something worse beneath. But the most unsettling part was the overpowering perfume lingering in the air. It wasn't just musty. It was like they were masking something rotten, something decaying beneath it all. The patio felt like a forgotten place. It was overgrown and sad, with a broken fountain spewing no water, surrounded by withered cacti. The ground was dotted with holes, which the previous tenants supposedly had left behind from their pet desert tortoises. I was told they'd moved out after the last owner died, but that sometimes they'd come back, as if they were still wandering the space. I tend to notice small details when something feels off, and it didn't take long before I found something that stood out. In a small, hidden room off the garage, I discovered shelves full of air fresheners. It was unsettling, to say the least. The next month felt like a nightmare. Our newborn cried constantly, and our older kids fell ill with high fevers. We had to rush them to the ER multiple times. Even the cats couldn't stand it. 2 of them ran away, and the third one hid all the time, barely coming out. The smell inside the house grew worse too, and with it came something even more disturbing, faint stains under the fresh coat of paint. They looked like splatters, almost like dried blood, stretching from the bathroom down the hall toward our bedroom. As the days went on, they became more and more noticeable, as if they were slowly creeping down the walls. I couldn't figure out why the plants on the patio were dying. They were desert plants, tough as nails, meant to survive the harshest conditions. But everything had withered, despite the previous tenants having only left about 6 months ago. What finally pushed us to leave were 3 things. First, my kids kept getting sick, and no one could figure out why. Second, the source of the musty smell was behind the refrigerator. When we pulled it out, we found a thick layer of green fungus growing there. like something had been rotting behind the wall for months. And third, the landlord kept showing up, asking if he could crawl into the crawl space beneath the house. The only access was through a panel in our bedroom closet, which felt far too invasive for comfort. After a month of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I quit my job at Sunshine Arts Incorporated one morning, rented a U-Haul, and started packing up. My wife and I worked well into the night, and by midnight we were gone, heading back to Phoenix and leaving that nightmare behind. Years later, in 2008, we decided to visit Tucson again. We took pictures of the Sunshine Arts Incorporated building and even the house where we had stayed. But something strange happened when we snapped a photo of the street sign outside the house. It didn't show up on our digital camera. Everything else was clear, but the street sign was gone. It was my wife, Christina, who decided to dig deeper into what had really been going on at that house. One evening when I came home, she told me she'd spoken to one of the neighbors about the problems we'd dealt with. The neighbor listened closely, then dropped a bombshell. The previous tenants weren't smokers. I should have mentioned this earlier. Our landlord had told us the smell was from the last renters being heavy smokers. That was also why they had to fumigate the place. But that wasn't the truth. According to the neighbor, the previous tenants had actually sued the landlord before leaving. They had even gone to court. At that point, I had enough information to understand why things had felt so off, but it wasn't the kind of truth I wanted to know. Still, the landlord kept showing up, asking to get into that crawl space. He'd come by every few days, telling my wife he needed access to check something beneath the house. The way he acted made things feel even stranger, like there was something he wasn't telling us. Meanwhile, my kids were still sick all the time. That's when I started taking pictures. Anything I could. The house, the stains, the mold. Anything that might explain what was going on or serve as evidence if I needed it later. This was before digital cameras, so I used a Polaroid camera. I even scanned a few of the pictures later, but I made sure not to scan any with my kids in them, just for their privacy. It was Christmas 1986, and even now, looking at those photos breaks my heart. My kids' faces were swollen, their fingers puffy from whatever was happening in that house. In one picture, they're sitting under the Christmas tree, trying to enjoy their presents, but you can see how miserable they were. It's hard to think about it without getting emotional. All I wanted was to get out of that place and back to Phoenix for good. I kept taking photos of the house, of the green fungus behind the fridge, the strange stains on the bathroom walls, the hallway, and our bedroom. I documented everything because I was determined to get my family packed up, get back to Phoenix, and make sure I got my deposit back, along with the rent I'd already paid for that terrible month. When I showed the landlord the pictures, I didn't hold back. I told him how sick the kids had been and mentioned that my wife had already reported him to the Environmental Protection Agency. He didn't argue. Instead, he handed me the full deposit back, along with the rent for the month. That was all I needed. We packed up and left for Phoenix as fast as we could. When we arrived, my wife, Christina, went to finalize the details for our new condo, while I went off to my first day at my new job. It wasn't even 2 hours into my shift when I got a call from her. Her voice was tight with stress. "There are people all over the house," she said. "There's someone from the Environmental Safety Agency here, and they say it's not safe for us to move in." I could barely process what she was saying. Workers were spraying chemicals all around the property, and the environmental safety guy insisted there were serious problems with the house. Christina was standing outside with our kids, completely overwhelmed. I explained the situation to my boss and asked for time off. She didn't hesitate. "Go," she said. "Take care of your family." I rushed over to the condo, and when I got there, Christina was standing outside with our kids, looking like she hadn't slept in days. She looked at me, her eyes wide. "They told me we can't move in." The house was crawling with workers, inside and out, scrubbing and spraying every surface. I decided we needed to stay in a hotel until things were sorted out. For 2 days, that's where we lived. When we were finally given the green light to move in, things seemed fine at first. From the outside, the condo was beautiful with its Spanish-style architecture. Inside, the walls were freshly painted, and the tan carpeting stretched across every room. It seemed charming, even welcoming, but something didn't sit right with me. Something felt off. Even as we were unpacking, workers were still inside. One was buffing the kitchen tiles with a large machine, while others vacuumed and scrubbed the windows, hallways, and bathrooms. The landlord said the previous tenants were heavy smokers, and that's why they were working to get rid of the smell. At the time, I smoked, and something about that explanation didn't sit well with me. This place didn't smell like stale cigarettes. It had a musty, damp odor, sour even, masked by heavy air fresheners. As I walked through the house, I checked the bedrooms and bathrooms. When I passed the hallway bathroom, I saw an older woman scrubbing the shower floor. She mumbled something in Spanish that I didn't understand, looking like she'd been cleaning all day. The strangest moment came when I stepped out onto the patio through the sliding glass door in our bedroom. The patio was large, larger than most people's backyards, but it felt empty and unsettling. The desert landscaping was lifeless. Dead cacti littered the area, and a broken rock fountain sat in one corner, surrounded by weeds and dry dirt. There were holes scattered around the ground. I couldn't help but ask the landlord about them. "What are those holes in the patio?" I asked. "They're from tortoises," he replied. "They used to be pets. Sometimes they come back looking for the rest of their family." I froze. "Family?" He nodded. "My wife. She loved those tortoises. They were her pets." Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "She passed away from cancer 2 years ago." I glanced back at the dead patio garden. This was her garden? "Yes," he said. "I haven't done anything with it since she passed, but I've been meaning to redo it." The landlord promised to restore the patio, but during the month we lived there, he never touched it. And as the weeks went by, things only got stranger. At first, it seemed like everything was going to be okay. In the evenings, Christina and I worked together to unpack and set up the bedrooms for the kids. They fell asleep early, exhausted from the move. But as I walked around the house, I couldn't shake the smell. It was strongest in the kitchen and bathroom, and every time I stood by the sliding glass door, staring out at that lifeless patio, I felt the air pressing down on me, heavy, like something was just waiting. Then the real trouble started. Less than a week after we moved in, I got a call from Christina. She was in the emergency room with our kids. Our oldest son had a fever over 104 degrees. The doctors treated him, but the sickness lingered. It wasn't just him. My wife and the other kids started feeling sick too. One night, while shaving, I heard a loud clunk from the bathroom. The metal soap dish had fallen off the shower wall. When I picked it up, the back was covered in black mold. I stared at the hole where it had fallen from, and to my horror, the entire inside of the wall was coated in the same black fungus. That's when I started noticing it everywhere. The stains on the bathroom walls, the tiles, even the hallway, growing darker and spreading every day. Christmas came, and we tried to make the best of it. Despite everything, we had a nice evening. Our son's face was swollen, his eyes puffy, but he still managed to smile as we exchanged gifts. We laughed about how he looked like the Michelin Man, trying to find some humor in such a terrible situation. It was a beautiful moment, but it couldn't mask the growing tension in the house. After Christmas, I decided to investigate the shed on the patio. Inside, I found rows of antifungal sprays and bottles of air freshener. It was clear someone had been battling the same problem before we arrived. By then, I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, I turned to Christina, and as much as I hated to admit it, asked, "Should we go home?" Without hesitation, she said, "Let's get the hell out of here." Hey, my name's Chris. You might have heard of me from the bands I play in, Danger Silent and Autumn's Fall. Last night, I was hanging out in the studio with a hip-hop artist who stopped by for some work. Somehow, our conversation shifted from music to life, and then to the supernatural. We started swapping stories about strange things we each experienced, and before long, we both agreed to head to my old house, the one with the craziest memories attached to it. That place still gives me chills when I think about it. After Googling to figure out what happened that night, I felt the need to share it with all of you here. Turns out, there are tons of stories like mine out there. So here's my one and only time telling this full story. Read it while it's here, because I'm not typing it out again. This is a 3-part tale, and here's how it breaks down. Asterisk Part 1. The Shadow at the Window, this section. Asterisk Part 2. The Bizarre Mountain Near My House. Asterisk Part 3. The Ghostly Voices We Recorded at My Friend's Place. Let's dive right into it. I was 17, a senior in high school, ready to graduate and head off to Arizona State University. I'm 23 now, but I still remember what happened back then like it was yesterday. My friend Richard, who lived just down the street, always talked about the weird things he'd seen at his place. He'd tell me about shadows moving around his room, strange creatures running through his backyard, and sometimes he'd wake up in weird spots, like on the roof of his house. He'd get so freaked out that he'd grab his shotgun, shine his flashlight around, and go after whatever it was. At first, I didn't believe him. It all sounded like something out of a bad horror movie. That is, until tonight I saw something strange at his place myself. I saw gates opening and closing on their own, heard strange noises, and even found footsteps in the dirt, when no one was even around. One time, I found a bullet casing in my car and noticed something weird written on my moonroof. That's when I started to wonder if Richard was telling the truth after all. One night, after all that weirdness, I was back at my place, just a block away from Richard's house. You know that feeling when you're half asleep and hear something in real life that blends into your dream? That's what happened to me. I was dreaming, but then I started hearing scratching sounds, like they were coming from my window. The sound grew louder, like something was right outside. Eventually, I woke up. At first, I didn't hear anything, but the second I got up and walked to the kitchen, it started again. This time, I was wide awake and my heart was racing. There were no trees or bushes near my window to make that kind of noise. I turned toward it. Even now, just thinking about it makes me feel uneasy. The blinds on my window were swaying slightly from the fan above me. Then, the sensor light outside flickered on, and I froze. I saw it. A shadow, clear as day, moved slowly past the window. It wasn't facing me, but I could see its outline. I just sat there, frozen, unsure of what I was seeing. Then it happened again. The shadow returned. This time it stopped and stared straight at me. Its eyes, red, glowing like burning embers, stared right into mine. The face was entirely black, and it wore what looked like a hood or cloak, like something you'd read about in old legends. It reminded me of the Grim Reaper, and just like that, it moved on, disappearing into the night. I was absolutely terrified. I ran straight to my parents' room, waking up my dad. Now, my dad's a tough guy, a Vietnam vet and a former NYPD officer. He doesn't believe in ghosts or supernatural stuff, but I was panicked, so I begged him to check it out. We grabbed a flashlight and went outside into the backyard. There was nothing there, nothing at all. We went back inside and pulled up the security camera footage. We checked the time when I saw the figure. Sure enough, the sensor light went off and the alarm was triggered. But the footage? It was empty. Nothing at all. It didn't make sense. The strangest part? Last night, talking with the hip-hop artist, he told me he saw the exact same thing I did. He said it even grabbed him once and that he couldn't stop shaking until he prayed. I'm not hugely religious, but I do believe in some kind of higher power. Hearing him describe what I saw, it was like he lived my experience. I can't stop wondering, what was outside my window that night? Was it connected to Richard somehow? But it gets even stranger. Near our neighborhood, there's a place called Coyote Mountain. It's not like any place I've ever seen. It's tied to more bizarre stories than I can count. That's a whole other tale though, and if you're curious, I'll share it in the next post. The Red-Eyed Shadow and Voices from the Grave, Part 2. And now, the final chapter of this strange saga. I run my own recording studio now, and sometimes we take our equipment out to different locations for side projects. One night, Richard asked me and my bandmate Nick to bring all our gear over to his house to spend the night recording. No one else was there. We packed up our equipment, grabbed some beers and tacos, and headed to his place. What happened next? Well, it's something I'll never forget. It was a chilly evening when we set up our base of operations for the night. Richard's room was the heart of our operation. His space was quiet, a perfect spot to set up our computer and recording gear. We scattered microphones around the house, hoping to capture every creak, every whisper of whatever might be lurking. We had a Shure SSM58 dynamic mic placed in the garage, two Shure PG81 omnidirectional mics in the kitchen, aimed in different directions to cover the space. A Rode NTK2 mic in the family room, facing away from the front door, and a modified Rode NT1 condenser mic positioned near the hallway, just outside Richard's brother and sister's rooms. Before we started, we made sure to test every mic, making sure to rule out any background noise, like the hum of the refrigerator or the occasional flush from the bathroom. Hours passed as we attempted to reach out to whatever Richard believed was in the house. Nick, always the bravest of us, decided it was time to step it up. "I'm going to try talking to it," he said, ignoring Richard's nervous warnings. Now, a bit of backstory. We'd all messed around with the Ouija boards before, at Richard's house and at mine. Richard was terrified of them, and for some reason, Nick always ended up in tears after we used them. I never fully understood why, but it always left a strange, unshakable energy in the air. We gathered in the family room, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Richard told us to clear our minds. No positive or negative thoughts, just a neutral state of mind. I was skeptical, of course, dismissing it as nonsense, convinced there was nothing there. But then, a heavy feeling crept into the room. Something shifted, and we all felt it. A dark presence. It was unmistakable. Reluctantly, we decided Nick should go alone first. I wasn't volunteering. I wasn't about to walk into whatever that thing was. Nick, however, walked out into the living room about 5 feet from the mic. I stayed behind in Richard's room, wearing headphones to monitor everything through the equipment. The mic was extremely sensitive. It could pick up the slightest noise. We sat in silence as Nick spoke. "If there's anything in this house, we just want to know what you want," Nick said, his voice steady but with a slight edge. "We're not here to harm you. Is there anything? Anything at all?" For a moment, there was only silence. But then, through the headphones, I heard it. Breathing. Slow. Deliberate. It came from right in front of the mic. My heart sank. It wasn't Nick's breath. I could hear exactly where the sound was coming from, and it wasn't him. Seconds later, Nick sprinted back into the room, slamming the door behind him. But when I heard it through the headphones, it sounded like the door shut twice. That didn't make sense. He only closed it once. While Nick tried to explain what he had experienced, I realized the breathing was still happening, loud and clear. I shouted for the others to listen, and Nick stood frozen in disbelief. He said he thought he'd heard coyotes howling outside, but there was no trace of that sound in the recording. Instead, we heard distant howls, almost like people screaming, echoing through the recording. It made no sense. Eventually, Nick worked up the courage to go back out, but this time there were no strange sounds. However, the recording picked up faint, eerie howls again, the same distant screams. When Richard went out next, nothing happened at all. It was as if whatever was there simply didn't care about him. That's when they turned to me. "Your turn," they said, grinning. I groaned but opened the door. I stepped out, the chill of the night air pressing in. I sat on the couch, flicking my lighter for a bit of light. The atmosphere felt thick, like the air itself was suffocating me. I tried speaking out loud, but there was no response. As I stood to leave, something caught my eye. A mirror hanging on the wall in the family room. It didn't feel right. The reflection, it felt wrong. I froze. My body wouldn't move. I was stuck, staring into the mirror, even though every fiber of my being screamed to leave. It was like my mind was trapped in another world, unable to break free. Richard later suggested I had been staring into some kind of alternate dimension. I still don't know what it was, but the feeling of dread stayed with me. When I finally returned to the room, we decided to take a break outside. We sat by our cars, smoking cigarettes, trying to shake the eerie feeling that had settled over us. That's when my girlfriend, Marissa, called. She was living in Tucson at the time, about 30 miles away. She'd been texting me all night, warning me not to mess with whatever was in the house. Her voice was shaky, telling me about a terrifying dream she'd had. She said everything was bright outside, like it was daytime. But inside her house, it was pitch black. The only thing she could see was a spotlight shining on me. She said I was frozen, unresponsive, no matter how many times she called my name. When I told her about what happened earlier, how I'd been stuck, staring into that mirror, she freaked out. She thought maybe it had been some kind of astral projection. Neither of us believed in that stuff, but the timing was too strange to ignore. The strangest part came when we reviewed the recordings. While we were outside, the house had been alive with noises, breathing, movement. It sounded like something walked across the room, sat down on the couch, and just relaxed. It even sighed, as though it was settling in for a long stay. None of us were inside at the time. We also heard low-frequency sounds, like the roar of an airplane overhead, but there was nothing above us. No planes, no helicopters, just the hum of the night. And then there was the faint ticking sound, like the tick of an old clock, but there were no clocks in the house. What really unnerved us was the realization that when we came back into the house, we must have walked right past whatever it was. It was still there waiting. This is the story of Mummy Mountain, a strange and mysterious place about a mile from my parents' house in a small town called Silver Springs. I've never been able to shake off the feeling that something isn't right about it. The first time I ventured up there was when I was almost 17, just beginning to play in my first band. My guitarist, Michael, and I had just finished up at a local cafe called The Grind, where he worked, and we were headed back to my place to work on a new song. As we drove through the town, something caught our attention, a huge rectangular green light glowing on the mountain in front of us. It had this eerie, fluorescent hue, almost unnatural in its brightness. Without thinking, we decided to check it out. We drove up the winding roads that led into the mountain range, but as soon as we hit the turnoff to the secluded neighborhood near the base, the light disappeared. We didn't stop there though, we kept going, curiosity driving us forward. The road we followed led us past a spot the locals called the Cliff, a drop so steep and sudden that you couldn't see what was ahead of you, and many people had driven off it by mistake in the past. It was notorious in town, and everyone knew to avoid it at night. Here's the strange part. Everyone knew about the cliff, but none of my friends had ever taken the left fork at the bottom. That's exactly where the green light had been, so Michael and I decided to take the left turn. The road twisted and wound its way higher up the mountain, eventually bringing us to a gated community hidden on the far side. These weren't just any homes. These were huge, multi-million-dollar mansions, some still under construction. The whole area looked new, but the gate's call box was old and rusted, almost as if it belonged in a completely different era. The name of the community, Skyline Ridge. Michael and I pulled up, and we could see a security guard walking around. We hesitated, unsure whether we should approach, but after a few minutes, we realized the guard would be gone by 10:30 p.m. every night. It seemed strange. Why would a neighborhood like this only have security during the day? Once the guard left, we made our move. We hopped the gate and started walking up the road. The night was unusually quiet, and the full moon cast everything in an eerie silver glow. As we walked, we passed strange, satellite-like machines scattered across the neighborhood. We couldn't make sense of them. Eventually, we came to one of the homes, where a bright light was shining from one of the rooms. Michael dared me to get closer, so I did. I crept up to the window, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A screen, floating in the middle of the room, with no visible borders. On it was an image of a glowing sunset that felt all wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. My stomach churned, and I backed away quickly. Michael and I ran up the road, feeling more uneasy with every step. A little further on, we found another house, this one with a front yard full of bizarre, twisted statues. As we looked down the hill, we saw another house, and it was glowing with a strange green light. This time we moved closer and looked inside, and what we saw made my heart stop. An operating table in the center of the room. Over it hung a bright light, and above the table was a pendulum with a sharp blade attached to it, swinging ominously. It felt like something straight out of a horror movie. After that night, Michael and I couldn't stay away. We kept going back to the mountain, visiting it dozens of times over the years, and every time, something strange happened. One night, I brought along my friend, Nick and Richard. He had his own experiences with strange happenings at a house he lived in. We recorded everything as we explored, and at one point, we caught a strange figure on tape running toward us. It was hard to make out clearly, but there was definitely someone standing in the brush as we drove away. I can still remember the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Another time, Michael and I returned during the day to investigate further. We pretended we were looking for a lost dog, hoping to get in, but the guard wouldn't let us through. Undeterred, we parked on the far side of the mountain and climbed up to a house under construction. As we explored the property, we heard something unsettling, faint sounds of crying babies or people yelling. It was unnerving. Our camera even picked up the sounds, but the footage cut out just as we stepped inside the house. There was also something strange about the cars in the area. They were always white. Several times, we noticed white cars following us, forcing us to hide under driveways or behind trees until they passed. It was always the same eerie feeling as if we were being watched. At the top of the community, there's a statue of an eagle perched atop a chimney. If you stand directly under it and look across the valley, you can see a triangle of green lights on the mountains in the distance. It's unnervingly precise, like they were positioned that way on purpose. One of the most chilling visits happened about a year ago. I took along my coworker, my ex-girlfriend, and a well-known music producer named Ralph. He's worked with big names in the music industry, so I was curious to see if he'd believe us. At first, he laughed it off, even trying to scare us. But as we walked deeper into the community, strange lights started to follow us. Ralph was quick to dismiss it, until we reached the gate. While Ralph and my coworker checked the call box, we heard something odd from the bushes, like a faint ringing. My coworker checked his phone, but it was turned off. When we started dialing random numbers on the box, one call connected. A woman's voice answered, speaking softly. I asked if she'd seen a lost dog, trying to keep the conversation casual, but she hung up quickly. Moments later, the call box rang again. This time, a man answered, his voice muffled, but I could have sworn he said, "They were just here." We ran. Later that night, my coworker noticed that every photo he'd taken of the call box had mysteriously disappeared from his phone. The pictures were just gone. To make things even stranger, Ralph called me about 15 minutes later, saying a blacked-out car had followed him all the way home. He only managed to escape by pulling into a neighborhood, shutting off his car, and lying low until the car finally left. Mummy Mountain remains a complete mystery to me. The homes, the lights, the sounds, none of it makes sense. I've seen glowing orbs, shadowy figures, bizarre machinery, and heard noises that I can't explain. I don't know what's going on up there, but it's like the mountain exists in its own strange reality, one that I'll never fully understand. What do you think is happening there? Have you ever encountered something like this? It all started late one night, just a few weeks ago. My brother and I were home alone because our mom had gone out on a date. I was getting ready for bed when my younger brother, Drew, stopped me in the hallway. He said he wanted to show me something. The house was mostly dark, so I thought maybe he was messing around with his toy lightsaber. After a little back and forth, I managed to convince him to let me go to bed. He walked toward the living room at the end of the hall, but only moments later he came rushing back to me, pale as a ghost. "What's wrong?" I asked, noticing his wide eyes locked on the far end of the hallway. "I saw something in the kitchen," he whispered. I asked him to describe it, and he told me he saw a dark figure with no clear shape but glowing red eyes. Now, Drew's got a pretty wild imagination, and he's always seeing things, so at first, I wasn't too concerned. Still, I told him to wait outside my room while I checked things out. Once I was alone, I grabbed my pendulum. I wasn't an expert at using it, but it had been accurate in the past. After calming myself, I asked it to show me yes and no. When the pendulum settled, I asked, "Is Drew lying about what he saw?" The answer came back as no. That caught me off guard, but I pressed on. "Is what Drew saw a ghost?" The pendulum swung to yes. Then I asked the question that chilled me to the bone. "Is it a native spirit?" The pendulum answered yes. A knot formed in my stomach. Something bad had found its way into our home. But I stayed calm and asked one more question. "Is it still in the house in the kitchen?" The answer was yes. I took a deep breath, then left my room and told Drew what I'd learned. Together we walked toward the kitchen, with Drew sticking close behind me. The light from the living room spilled into the kitchen, but I didn't see anything unusual. Holding the pendulum, I asked again, "Is the ghost still in the kitchen?" The pendulum swung to yes. I stood my ground and said, "Whoever or whatever you are, you're not welcome here. Leave." For a moment, everything was still. Then I lifted the pendulum and asked, "Is the ghost gone?" This time, the answer was yes. Even though it was gone, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my stomach. I told Drew to follow me back to my room, where we both sat on my bed. I decided to ask more questions about the spirit. "Is the ghost still on the property?" I asked. The pendulum answered yes. "Does it want to hurt us?" "No." "Is it angry?" "No." That confused me. I'd assumed a negative spirit would mean danger, but I had to keep my mind open. After a moment, I asked, "Is the ghost sad?" The pendulum swung to yes. I paused, letting that sink in. Drew sat quietly, watching me try to make sense of it all. "Is the ghost a man?" I asked. The pendulum moved to no. "Is it a woman?" "Yes." "Does she want to move on?" "Is that why she came here?" "Yes." Suddenly, an idea came to me. Our house had its share of other spirits, ones tied to the land. Maybe they could help her. I asked, "Are the spirits already here willing to help her?" The pendulum answered yes. Feeling a little more at ease, I asked, "Could one of you bring her back inside so we can help her move on?" Again, the pendulum said yes. Turning to Drew, I smiled. "Are you okay with this? I'll ask her to stay here until Mom comes back so we can help." Drew nodded, his expression softening. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I just hope we can do something for her." A moment later, Drew spoke up. "It just got colder in here." I noticed it too, though my room had always been the coldest in the house. I apologized aloud to the woman for being so forceful earlier and told her she could stay in my room until we could help her move on. I made it clear that she had to stay in my room and not wander around the house. She agreed. As we asked more questions, we learned that she had been drawn to the house by Drew's positive energy. He reminded her of someone she had known, her son. When Drew asked if her son was still alive, the pendulum answered yes. "Hey Drew," I said, "would you be okay with her following you until Mom gets back?" He hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "I wouldn't mind," he said. His only condition was simple. "You can follow me, just don't scare me." After that, everything calmed down. Drew left my room, and I went to bed after texting Mom about what had happened. When she came home the next morning, Drew was sound asleep, and I filled her in. To my surprise, she didn't seem bothered by it. She was almost excited. Usually, she didn't want to talk about the ghosts. I grabbed my pendulum one last time. Did the woman move on? I asked. The answer came back as yes. I guess just being near Drew was enough to bring her peace. When Drew woke up, I told him the news, and he was happy to hear it. Even now, just thinking back on that night, I feel that same calm I felt then. Helping her move on was an unforgettable experience, and I'm grateful we could do something to help her. Gus grew up in a quiet neighborhood in a small town in Illinois, not far from Chicago, and has encountered some of the most chilling paranormal events throughout his life. His stories, though unsettling, offer a rare look into the eerie encounters he's had over the years. Buckle up. There's a lot to unpack. When Gus was a child, his family moved into an old apartment building in a small town that had been recently restored after a devastating fire years prior. The fire had claimed several lives, including those of young children, and left behind a lingering darkness that seemed impossible to shake. His sister had one of the most terrifying experiences there. At the time, she was in an abusive relationship, and her husband would often lock her in the apartment when he went out. She would spend hours alone, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, watching TV. From where she lay, she could see down the hall to a small linen closet, its door hidden by a curtain. She often told Gus she would see a little boy peeking out from behind the curtain, giggling softly. The sight terrified her, but she convinced herself it was just her imagination, or maybe one of the younger siblings playing a prank. But when she looked closer, she saw something far worse. The boy had hideous burn marks across his body, as if he'd been caught in the fire. More than once, the boy reached for her blanket, trying to pull it off while she lay frozen in fear. She would close her eyes tightly, praying for him to go away. These terrifying episodes seemed to stretch on for minutes, leaving her shaken and helpless. Gus himself had a horrifying encounter in that same apartment. One day, while grabbing something from his parents' room, he suddenly felt a chilling grip on his leg. He looked down and saw a wrinkled old hand emerging from the dresser drawer, cold as ice. He screamed and ran out of the room, but the sensation of that cold, bony hand stayed with him, leaving a bruise on his leg that lingered for days. Another unnerving incident took place when Gus was coming home from school one afternoon. As he walked down the alley near the apartment, he noticed a swirling mist moving on its own, creeping through the space like a living thing. Curious but cautious, Gus hid behind a tree, watching it shift and drift. When the mist began moving toward him, his fear kicked in, and he ran. But perhaps the most eerie incident in that apartment involved the family phone. It was a busy evening, with guests gathered in the living room and others cleaning up in the kitchen. The phone rang, and everyone assumed someone had answered it. But when the phone suddenly jerked from its cradle and was pulled through the bathroom door, no one could figure out why. At first, it was shrugged off, but when they knocked on the bathroom door and received no response, they broke it open. The room was empty, and the phone hung from the cord, wedged tightly in the door. Outside the apartment, Gus and his friends had their own strange encounters. The neighboring building had a reputation for being haunted. Some said an old woman, a witch, lived there. The kids swore they'd seen her sitting motionless on the telephone lines, a dark figure that never seemed to move. They'd throw rocks and yell at her, but she would remain perfectly still, disappearing later without a trace. Gus also had a number of terrifying experiences during his visits to family in a small village in Mexico. One of his first memories there was being initiated by local children. They dragged him to the river and pointed toward the water, shouting, "There she is." He looked and saw a woman, her face twisted in sorrow, crying for her children. It wasn't until later that he learned the legend of La Llorona, the weeping woman, a figure from Mexican folklore who roams riversides, mourning the loss of her children. Whether the children were pranking him or not, their terror seemed real. Some of them ran off, crying in fear. Another time, Gus's grandfather had been out drinking, and that night, the women in the family were comforting his grandmother, who had been hurt by his infidelity. Suddenly, the women fled from the kitchen in a panic, crossing themselves and murmuring prayers. They claimed to have seen long, dark hair emerge from the smoke vent, accompanied by a loud snorting noise. When they looked closer, they saw what appeared to be the head of a horse, staring back at them. On another occasion, Gus stayed with a friend in the same village, where the house was so small that they had to sleep on the floor of the living room. In the middle of the night, Gus woke to the sound of shouting coming from outside. He looked out the window and saw a group of villagers, armed with rakes and shovels, chasing a man dressed entirely in black. They called him El Hombre Nocturno, the night man, or, more ominously, the devil himself. Surrounding him were dozens of black cats, hissing and crawling all over him. When the villagers returned, they confirmed the man had been chased off, but everyone remained shaken, uncertain of what they had seen. Gus's experiences, both in Chicago and in Mexico, were as chilling as they were unforgettable. From the ghostly boy in the apartment to the horrifying encounters in the village, each story paints a vivid picture of the strange and terrifying forces that seemed to follow him. Whether it was a ghost child, a mist that shouldn't exist, or the devil himself, each encounter left Gus with more questions than answers, forever haunted by the mystery of what he had witnessed. It was the summer of 1997 when everything changed. My friend David's aunt passed away, leaving her old house empty while the family worked on cleaning it up and getting it ready for sale. David, always eager for adventure, volunteered to stay there. For the rest of us, it was a dream come true. A buddy with his own house. It was the perfect place to hang out. We threw so many parties there, but along with the fun, we had some experiences that I still can't quite explain. What I'm about to tell you happened between the summer of 1997 and late 1999. About a week after David moved in, we all went over to help him set the place up. It was a charming old house with raised wooden floors that creaked loudly whenever you walked on them, a sound that felt so out of place for a house in the heart of the desert. As we worked, something strange started happening. The lights flickered on and off like there was a short in the wiring. But it wasn't just the lights. A loud thud echoed through the house, like something heavy had been dropped. The lights flickered back on, but the house felt different. It hummed with a strange vibration, almost like a ringing in our ears. We didn't talk about it much, but it definitely left us all on edge. For a while, nothing else happened. We tried to forget about it, but things started to feel off. Then one afternoon, David invited me over to hang out. I arrived early, since I got out of school about 45 minutes before he did. I sat on the front steps, headphones on, listening to my music. It was a hot day, the air dry and still, when something strange happened. A wave of uneasiness washed over me, like I was being watched, like something was lurking just out of sight. I turned to look, and that's when I saw it. The blinds in the window were swaying back and forth, as if someone was inside. But there were no pets, and the AC was broken. No draft to explain it. When David finally got home, I told him about it, but he just seemed concerned, not really interested in investigating. Later that year, during a huge party David threw for my birthday, something happened that none of us could ignore. The house was packed with people, the music thumping, when suddenly, a loud slam echoed through the room. David's bedroom door had slammed shut with a force that made everyone stop what they were doing. David rushed to check it out, but the room was empty. The blinds were pulled, the dresser blocking the windows. No way anyone could have snuck in or out. It was unsettling, but with the crowd around, we tried to shake it off and keep the party going. Another time, our friend Dee was staying over and went to the bathroom. As he stepped into the hallway, a glowing orb of light shot out of the bathroom and sped toward David's room before vanishing. A couple of us saw it too, and we just stared, unable to come up with an explanation. None of us were big believers in the supernatural, but that definitely made us question things. One of the strangest moments happened when Gus, a friend who seemed to have a sixth sense about these things, came to visit. He swore he saw a figure walking from the kitchen toward David's room. He described it as an older woman, someone who looked like David's aunt. That room had been hers before she passed, and it was where she died. That little detail made the air feel even heavier in the house. Around this time, Dee decided to try and cleanse the house. He had a small pouch of sage he carried around his neck, joking that it was Jerry Garcia's remains. The moment he opened the pouch, the door to David's bedroom slammed shut with a deafening bang. That was enough for Dee. He bolted out of the house and didn't come back for weeks. The strangest thing I personally experienced had to do with the kitchen. The pots and pans would start clanging together, and I'd catch glimpses of shadows darting across the room. Every time we checked, the noises and shadows stopped. But as soon as we sat back down on the couch, it would start all over again. It was like something was trying to let us know it was there, but it didn't want to be seen. David's house was unforgettable, filled with both good times and strange occurrences. I can't explain what happened there, but those experiences have stayed with me over the years. That's all I've got for now, but I wanted to share some of the eerie things we went through at David's house. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When I was about 3 years old, my mom and I lived in an old apartment in a small town in Oregon. Looking back, the memories are a little blurry, but there's one thing I'll never forget. There was definitely something strange about that place. My mom swears she always knew it was haunted, but it wasn't until years later that I learned just how true that was. Our apartment was part of a row of 4 buildings, each facing a quiet street, but ours was positioned oddly. The front of our place faced the side of a neighboring building, and from our kitchen window, you could see a smokestack in the distance. It was part of the old crematorium just a few blocks away. My mom thought that was the reason our apartment seemed to attract the supernatural. She once told me that spirits, especially those unwilling to leave, are drawn to the highest point they can see, and for some of those lingering near the crematorium, that meant our apartment. It didn't take long for the strange things to start. The first sign was when my mom was unpacking in the kitchen. All the cupboard doors were wide open, even though there were no drafts or anything that could explain it. Then, as if on cue, the doors slammed shut, every single one of them, all at once. They weren't flimsy cupboards that could easily move. It was as if something was slamming them with purpose. That was just the beginning. The oddities became part of our daily life. My mom, who's always been sensitive to that sort of thing, said she constantly felt like something was watching her, moving around her, but rarely did it directly interact with her. For me, though, it was different. I had a few spirits that seemed to take a particular interest in me. One in particular, a man, would come into my room, and we'd play together. I was never scared of him. In fact, he made me feel safe. But there was another presence that terrified me, a small disfigured creature that would show up at night. This thing would glow with an eerie orange light and tug at my blankets when I tried to sleep. The man was nothing like that. He appeared as a white, almost translucent figure, just a little muscular, and sometimes he'd be a full figure, sometimes just an outline. I never saw his eyes, but his smile, that smile was the one thing I can remember clearly. It was warm, inviting, and I always felt calm when I saw it. He would sit next to me on the floor of my room, playing quietly until my mom would come in. As soon as she entered, though, he would stand up and run straight through the wall, disappearing into the neighboring apartment. I'd chase after him, banging on the wall and yelling for him to come back. My mom said the neighbor often complained about strange things happening in her apartment too, but when she was asked, she always denied anything was out of the ordinary. The apartment, as my mom would later say, was crowded with spirits. Not all of them were friendly either. Our cats would freeze in place, hissing and scratching at the air or at walls, reacting to things we couldn't see. Then things started to turn darker. My mom's boyfriend moved in, and soon after, she found out she was pregnant. But the pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, and my mom believed the evil presence in our apartment was to blame. One night, she could feel something was terribly wrong. She was in pain, and in that moment, an entity chased her into the bathroom. It was determined to harm her, and she felt the threat more sharply due to her weakened state. She began to bleed and feared for her life, but then, just as it felt like everything was closing in on her, a gray figure appeared in the doorway. It was my little brother's great-grandfather, who had passed away. He stood there, keeping the dark force at bay while my mom made her way to the hospital. Though she nearly passed out a few times, he would place his hand on her, helping her stay conscious. The evil spirit followed her all the way to the hospital, but couldn't touch her as long as he was nearby. Sadly, despite all efforts, my little brother, David, didn't survive. Losing him hit both of us hard. I was so excited to have a sibling, and my mom's grief made it even harder. But my great-grandfather didn't leave us. He stayed close, offering comfort and protection, and not long after, my mom found herself pregnant again. Determined to change the atmosphere in the apartment, My mom called in a friend who performed a blessing. He spoke to the spirits there, helping guide many of them to the next place. When he finished, we learned just how many dangerous spirits had been in the apartment. 30, to be exact. All angry and malevolent. My mom was thankful they were gone, though she knew that because of the apartment's location near the crematorium, others would likely find their way in. After the blessing, the strange orange creature disappeared, but my ghostly friend stayed. Now he'd play with my younger brother too. By this point, my mom had grown to trust him, knowing he was harmless. Years passed, and eventually, we moved out of that apartment. I'll admit, I miss it sometimes. My mom does too. We've even talked about visiting just to see how the place is now, and if my old friend is still around. I'd love to stand in my old room, smile, and let him know that I'm okay, that I haven't forgotten him or the other spirits who shared that space with us. If there are new ghosts there now, I'd want to let them know they don't have to linger. That apartment, with all its strange events and eerie presence, was more than just a place to live. It was a chapter of my life, one that I'll always carry with me. I started my job 3 years ago, and after a while, I decided to switch to the overnight shift. The slower pace and quiet atmosphere were appealing, but that's when I began noticing things I couldn't quite explain. At first, it was subtle, dark figures moving past the corners of my eyes. I tried brushing it off, convincing myself it was just the result of exhaustion. There were also strange tapping noises on the large windows behind my desk, but with the hustle and bustle of the office, I assumed it was someone else causing the noise. But when I transitioned to the graveyard shift, things became harder to ignore. They relocated our team to the far side of the office, and that's when the strange occurrences seemed to escalate. About 50 feet in front of my cubicle, a TV screen hung from the ceiling, tracking incoming calls. While I worked, I began catching glimpses of a dark shape moving in front of the screen. It was maddening. To block it out, I started stacking papers and files higher in my cubicle, hoping the distractions would help. But one night, I finally saw it clearly. It was the top half of a shadow figure, visible only from the side. Its head was tilted slightly backward, and its mouth hung open as if it was in some dazed, lost state. I couldn't help but wonder if that's what these shadow figures were, drifting between dimensions, unaware of where they were. Maybe it was drawn to the light of the TV screen or the energy it emitted. Whatever it was, it moved fast. And when it wasn't in front of the screen anymore, I could feel its presence somewhere else in the office. That knowledge unsettled me more than I expected. Late into the night, the noises started. Banging sounds, alarms going off for no reason, and the feeling of something brushing past my desk became a regular occurrence. But the thing that bothered me most was going to the bathroom alone. More than once, I'd hear the toilet in the men's room flush repeatedly, even though I was in the women's room nearby. When I returned to my desk, I'd ask the only other person there if he used the bathroom. He always said no. One of my coworkers even had a creepy experience in the restroom too. He told me that the paper towel dispenser, the kind that automatically spits out towels, went off by itself while he was standing at the sink, far away from the sensor. The moment it happened, he bolted back to his desk, looking completely freaked out. Eventually, it was just me and one other guy working the graveyard shift. We'd often swap stories about the weird things we'd both experienced. There were so many, I could probably write a whole book. One night, around 2 a.m., I was sitting at my desk, watching a movie when something caught my attention. Down the long aisle leading to the restrooms, I saw the top half of that shadow figure darting between the supervisor's cubicles. That hallway was always darker at night, especially when we turned off the harsh office lights, but I clearly saw it. It moved so fast. Later, I saw it again, just the top of its head passing between random cubicles. The idea of a restless spirit started to make more sense to me. I tried to ignore the shadow, though. I had heard that spirits can sense fear and feed off your energy, so I didn't want to give it any power. But over time, I began to feel like the spirit knew I wasn't afraid. It even started to play with me. Sometimes I'd catch it peeking around a corner, as if it were teasing me, almost as if it were saying, "I see you. Do you see me?" It felt almost playful, as if it were enjoying itself. One night, my coworker and I were chatting, and I felt a tug on the back of my shirt. At first, I thought it was just my shirt getting caught on my belt, but then it happened again, and I knew it wasn't my imagination. I stopped mid-sentence, realizing that the spirit, whom I was now certain was female, was tugging on my shirt. I didn't feel scared. In fact, I found it kind of amusing. I'm still convinced she's a female spirit. While some might find her presence unsettling, I've come to see her as more mischievous than anything. There are plenty of other stories I could share, but this is just a glimpse of what I've experienced working the night shift. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It's hard to explain the feeling when you know something's watching you, but when it starts happening inside your own home, and then your child begins talking about things you can't see, it's a whole different level of unsettling. My son has been talking to people lately. I don't know who they are, because I can't see them, and neither can my husband. I'm not sure when it started, but I have a feeling it might have been his uncle. His uncle passed away just after my son was born, and we were living in California at the time. The timing couldn't have been worse. My son was born, and then his uncle passed just 3 weeks later. I couldn't get my son a passport fast enough to go to the funeral, so my husband went alone. When he returned, something had changed in him. He wasn't the same. He insisted that we move back to the East Coast. I didn't argue, life had been hard, and I just wanted things to settle. So we packed up and left California. We found a small house in a quiet town in New Jersey, not far from where my brother-in-law had passed. My son started sleeping in that room. It felt strange to me, but it seemed to bring my husband some peace, so I didn't think much of it. That's when my son started talking to, well, I'm not sure what. He was still a toddler, barely able to speak, but we hear him chattering away on the baby monitor at night. It wasn't anything understandable, just babbling. But when we check on him, we'd ask him who he was talking to. He'd just point, usually toward the corner of the room, or sometimes at the curtains. And when we asked, "Who are you talking to?" he'd reply, "The man," and keep pointing at nothing. It made my skin crawl. When we moved out of that house, it stopped. No more talking to the invisible man. I thought it was just a phase. Kids have wild imaginations, don't they? But now, we're back in the East Coast, living in a new apartment complex in a small town in Vermont. The building was constructed on the site of an old nursing home, but I didn't think much of it. After all, it's not uncommon for new buildings to go up on old land. But the strange things have started up again. Doors open by themselves. At night, when everyone's asleep, I hear footsteps, soft, shuffling footsteps, on the hardwood floors. It's as though someone is walking around, and no one else is awake. It's not hostile, but it's definitely unnerving. I also have this constant sensation that I'm being watched, like I'm never really alone. The strangest part is with my son. He's almost fully potty trained now, but every so often, he has accidents in the bathroom, or just outside it. We thought they were just accidents at first, until one day I asked him why he kept wetting himself. His answer took me completely off guard. He said, "There's a guy in the bathroom." I immediately took him to the bathroom and asked, "Where is he? Can you show me?" Without any hesitation, my son pointed straight at the toilet and said, "The guy's there." I asked him if the guy was still there, and he said no. He seemed completely fine, going about his business as if nothing unusual had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I know it might sound silly, but I just don't feel comfortable letting him go to the bathroom alone anymore. He doesn't seem scared, but there's something in his voice that tells me he's not entirely at ease with whatever is in there. My son isn't the type to be afraid of much. He's a brave little guy, but whatever's in that bathroom is clearly bothering him, and that, in turn, bothers me. I've had my share of ghostly encounters, and I'm not easily spooked by them. In fact, I used to be fairly comfortable with the idea of spirits. I didn't mind the thought of his uncle visiting him, late night chats and all. But this new thing in the bathroom has left me feeling uneasy. My son isn't afraid of much, but whatever is in that bathroom is making him uncomfortable. And that makes me wonder, is this something that's been lingering here in the walls of this old building? Or is it something new? I just don't know. And as much as I want to rationalize it, I can't help but feel that it's affecting him in a way that feels different. Maybe it's just the way he talks about it. Maybe it's the way he started to avoid going near the bathroom alone. Whatever it is, it's unsettling, and I don't know what to do about it. I don't want to scare him, but at the same time, I feel like I need to protect him from whatever it is that's making him uneasy.